listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
It's all over, bar the shouting, the wailing, the gnashing of teeth and the rending of garments. And of course, the court actions. The fight back has begun. Announced in the Four Seasons Garden Center in Philadelphia by Rudy Giuliani using an oil drum as a podium. Next door to a sex shop and opposite a crematorium. I'm not making any of that up. Somebody was asked to book the Four Seasons for Rudy Giuliani's big press conference, and they booked the Four Seasons open landscaping car park. I'm sorry. I can't go on. Look, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride as we dive deep into the Four Seasons fish pond to look at the entrails of the US presidential election with Moat royalty, Rania Khalek and Chris Hedges. And of course, we'll be talking about matters here on this side of the Atlantic too, as Boris Johnson, who's never met Joe Biden, has to hastily adjust and shift even his position because, well, Biden is not any more sympathetic to the British government than Barack Obama was. Well, with his historical rejection of the British Empire and all that. It's not been forgotten, Boris. It's all change in Washington. Or is it? How did it happen? This is the place where we can have the most frank and open discussion about that. This is rock and roll radio with pictures. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. You can listen also on FM in the Washington, D.C. area. I expect Donald Trump is settling down to do so right now. 105.5 are the magic numbers there. And on AM across the United States from Burning City to Burning City. Around the world online on SputnikNews.com. But hundreds of thousands of you, I'll warrant, are already watching as well as listening. And if you are on Facebook, then please share with all of your contacts and all of your friends, because this is going to be a rather special broadcast, I think. You can watch also on YouTube and on Twitter and on Twitch and also on Instagram, at least for the first part of the show, this, my monologue. I address you, of course, on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, the crushing of the fascist beast in the rubble of Berlin. This is the first Remembrance Day of the 75th anniversary year. The fallen in World War I and in the anti-fascist war of World War II must be remembered by all right-thinking people. And they must be differentiated. Jeremy Corbyn made a terrible blunder today in his tweet on Remembrance Sunday, remembering all those who lost their lives in the wars, not including the SS and Panzer divisions, not including Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels and the fascist beasts who were crushed underfoot by the Red Army in Berlin. I'm not remembering them. I'm remembering those in the great wartime alliance of Great Britain, the United States of America, and the then USSR that broke the back of fascism. German fascism, Italian fascism, and Japanese fascism. It doesn't mean that fascism has gone away, but if it had not been broken, we would not be talking, at least in this language, on this medium, this free space, this open university today. And so I bow my head to the fallen of the armies of the victorious Allied coalition. Having spoken briefly there about Jeremy Corbyn, I want to take this minute to reflect that what began as tragedy has now turned into total farce. Jeremy Corbyn, not 12 months ago, was the leader of the British Labour Party. He had, 2 years previously, taken Labour to its biggest increase in votes since 1945 and the great Labour post-war landslide victory. He came within less than 4,000 votes of becoming the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He expanded the Labour Party threefold into the biggest social democratic or Labour Party ever in the history of the Western world. Well over 500,000 members. And now he's been kicked out of the party that less than 12 months ago he led. And the putative reason, the proximate reason, the stated reason why he's been kicked out is for a statement which was not only of the bleeding obvious, but was indisputably, forensically, indisputably true. Now, if I were him, if I'd been advising him, I would have advised him not to say anything at all, because the much vaunted inquiry on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party had come to the conclusion, the only conclusion that it could possibly have come to, that the number of anti-Semites in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn turned out to be 2 people, 2 cases. I would have smiled. I might have said, I told you. I might not have spoken at all. But for Corbyn to be kicked out of the Labour Party for a statement which is incontestably true, that the problem of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party had been grotesquely exaggerated by his political enemies within the party and by the mass media whose purpose was to break him as a man, whose purpose was to break the possibility of a candidate from outside of the mainstream, outside of the prevailing orthodoxy to ever become the Prime Minister of a country like Great Britain. Their job is done. Corbyn is defunct. Corbynism defunct. People are leaving the Labour Party at a rate of knots every single day, but they are not satisfied. They are determined now to root out anyone connected to Jeremy Corbyn, just in case. I may say that such ruthlessness was quite alien and foreign to Jeremy Corbyn, which may be the reason why he's politically dead and they are politically in charge. Maybe there's a lesson there for the future in politics, for people who think like him. But today I saw Emily Thornberry, who sat in all of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinets, latterly as the shadow foreign secretary, the 3rd or 4th most important position in that shadow cabinet, was asked on Sky News if she regretted sitting in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, a position she would have died for a position she'd have bit your hand off for, a position she was prepared to indulge in all kinds of ideological gymnastics for, and her answer was, whatever my personal feelings about that, I'm not going to announce them on national television. Fickle, Emily. And then I looked for an image of her to tweet, and I discovered one of poor old Jeremy kissing her hand at the Labour Party conference, literally kissing her hand. You see, Corbyn is no more because he clasped these vipers to his breast. He preferred those vipers to his own friends, to those he'd sat with, marched with, those he'd campaigned with, those he'd been on picket lines with. He preferred these vipers over them and stood by and allowed all of his friends, one after the other, to be kicked to the curb like curs. He went along with it all, and he imagined that somehow those whose hands he was kissing were in any way loyal to him. It's a tragedy and it's a farce. Now, of course, Donald Trump was not Jeremy Corbyn, but he was from outside of the mainstream. He was from outside of the prevailing orthodoxy. And look at the effort they have made to destroy him. World historic levels of effort. So if I answer my own question, has there been a coup in America? The answer, again, incontestably, is yes. And it didn't begin last week. It began 4 years ago. The same people who told us, their faces wreathed in anger and indignation, that the Russians had stolen the election in 2016, that Putin was a Russian agent, and that Putin had picked the US president, are now equally angrily, their faces wreathed in exactly the same indignation, condemning those who question the integrity of the election. You can't rig an American election. The people who told us the Russians rigged the last one are now saying. Now, for many people, far too many people, idiots, to speak in the way I'm speaking is taken as me supporting Donald Trump. No matter that I have said so often I'm sick saying it, I would not vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden on pain of death. I don't believe in the concept of the lesser of two evils, even if we could agree on which was the lesser of those two evils. Trump is a thoroughgoing disaster from the point of view of my politics. He has scarred the Middle East with livid, raw, bloody scars from Syria to Yemen. He has murdered the hammer of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, General Soleimani, murdered him like a dog, risking an all-out war in the Middle East. Trump has starved my friends in Venezuela, overthrown my friends in Bolivia. He's right behind the murder squads in Colombia. He failed to bring the jobs back to the Rust Belt of America. He showered the richest people in America with untold riches in tax cuts. $1 why would somebody like me support Donald Trump? I loathe, despise, hate Donald Trump, full stop, and Biden, full stop. That's my point, you see. You don't have to look in the crystal ball to see what kind of president Joe Biden is going to be. You can read the book. The gang are back on the Potomac. The crooked, murdering gang are back on the Potomac. The Clinton gang, the Obama gang, the Biden gang, the Weinstein gang, the Epstein gang, all the agglomerate of vile corruption, of imperial domination are back. The warmongers are back. That's why I say I don't know if we could agree on which is the lesser of these two evils, Biden and Trump. Sure, the American bombers will now be painted with a rainbow flag on the tail fin, maybe a Black Lives Matter logo, as the bombs rain down on black and gay men and women, brown people, people of all color, in the next 4 years of a Biden administration. How do I know that? Because they've already been in power. How can Biden be the antidote to Trumpism? Biden is part of the cause of Trumpism. The globalizers, the people that unscrewed whole factories from the floor of the once workshop of America and shipped them south to Mexico, where the workers work almost for nothing, or shipped them all the way to China. Trump's unhinged hatred of China didn't stop him buying all his campaign memorabilia from China. American capitalism has sold out the interest of its own people under both Trump and the Biden, Clinton, Obama gang. There is no difference between these two people, except that one may talk words of kindness, quote the nicer parts of the Bible, all the while girding themselves for the next US Democratic war. Where will it be? Syria, probably. But Russia is very firmly in their sights, or at least was, until the Russians failed to rig this election. Do I think there's anything in Trump's complaints that he was robbed? I absolutely do. You will never convince me that an election in which Trump got 7 million votes more in 2020 than he did in 2016, that his vote went up everywhere and amongst every demographic except the white males that he was imagined always to be playing to. Most women in America voted for the vile, sexist Donald Trump. A record number of minorities in America voted for the vile, racist Donald Trump. Most union members in America voted for the Wall Street creep Donald Trump. These are facts which cannot be changed. But other facts can be changed. I myself have seen enough evidence from Pennsylvania, from Georgia, from Michigan, about gigantic transfers of votes, about record numbers of centenarians voting by mail, even though they died decades before. I have seen ample evidence of the millions of mail-in ballots that were sent to people who never asked for them, to realize that the courts may not find it quite so easy to brush aside Rudy Giuliani's complaints from that oil drum in the Four Seasons Garden Center in Philadelphia. Do I think that that will prevail? No. I believe that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, but not for long. In fact, it's a moot point whether or not he'll get to the inauguration itself. And if I were him, I wouldn't stand near the balcony with Kamala Harris behind me. I wouldn't let her push my wheelchair down a slope to look at the spring flowers if I was Joe Biden. Will Trump be back? Probably not. He doesn't look fit enough to me to do a Grover Cleveland and come back in 2024. Maybe if Vladimir Putin trains him, gives him a bit of a workout, takes him out bare-chested on a horse, shows him how to pump weights, maybe, but I doubt it. It's more dangerous than that. The next Donald Trump in 2024 will not be handicapped by the multiple ugliness of this Donald Trump. The next Donald Trump is slouching towards Washington right now, preparing to be born. It's going to be the mother of all talk shows.
Hello, mother of all talk shows.
Hello.
Yes?
Who is this?
Who are you trying to reach?
What number is this?
What number are you trying to reach?
I don't know.
Well, I think you have the wrong number.
Do I?
You do. Take it easy. Hi, mother of all talk shows.
Why don't you want to talk to me?
Who is this?
If you tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
That's one of our jingles. We're in an ad break.
Really?
Look, you're being a nightmare. What do you want to talk about?
What's your worst nightmare?
Currently, you?
Come on. What's your worst nightmare?
Well, the planet's on fire, the economy's ruined, social decency is dead, the north of England might as well be Europe, and I've just been declined universal credit. Hello?
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Okay, so we've got a poll running. 1,000 people have responded already. When will Kamala Harris take over as president from Joe Biden? A, immediately, 12%. B, 2021, 49%. C, 2022 or later, 39%. You can vote right now on my Twitter feed. As I said, Chris Hedges is the mother of all talk shows royalty. If they had royalty in America, he would definitely be a prince. He is a journalist, a writer, an activist, an intellectual of the highest rank. And he joins me now. Again, I'm grateful to Chris Hedges for being with me. Chris, it's been a tumultuous few days. I'll not ask you a question. I'll simply say, tell us how you see it.
Well, I heard you list some of the analytics, which I think are actually really important, because they implode this notion that somehow Trump's political base is driven by racism. Of course, some of it is. But as you may have mentioned, support from white men without a college education dropped pretty significantly from 48% 2016 to 37%. 26 of his votes came from non-white Americans. That's the highest percentage for a Republican candidate since 1960. He got 32 to 35% of the Latino vote. He doubled his support with black women. Again, it was small to begin with, 4% in 2016, but it rose to 8%. He increased support among white women from 53 to 55%. The support from black men jumped from 13 to 18%. And this despite a slew of accusations about rape and sexual assault and open misogyny and the racist tropes that he constantly delivered to white supremacists. I mean, even his support among the LGBTQ community went from 14 to 28%.
Wow.
And the polling seems to indicate that without the pandemic, he would have won, because that was the top issue for 41% of the voters who supported Biden to 3-1. Among those for whom the economy was the top issue, that was about 28% of the electorate. Trump got 80% of the vote. And I think we have to ask what the figures say, I think, about the two ruling parties. And I think that again, as you got from your talk before I came on, if the Democrats, which I expect, continue to be captive to big donors on Wall Street and refuse to embrace the anti-corporate message, promises for Medicare for all, Green New Deal, et cetera, that drew such enthusiasm to Bernie Sanders, we are going to get a competent fascist, because Trump was his own worst enemy. He couldn't focus. He couldn't read a briefing book. He was too impulsive. But there are many people, Tom Cotton, Michael Pence, and others in this kind of Christianized fascism who are competent. And I think that the analytics show that at least, almost half of this country has had it with the two ruling elites. I don't think they were blind to who Trump was, but they don't trust these smooth-talking Democratic politicians like Joe Biden or Barack Obama, because they sold them out. And I just make one other point. The lies these Democrats told was far more damaging to the well-being of the working class than any lie Trump ever told. Trying to sell them NAFTA and austerity programs. Remember, it was Clinton that cut the welfare, destroyed our welfare program, and 70% of the original recipients were children. These were all these smooth-talking, kumbaya unity Democrats. And I think the country is in serious trouble. Half of the country believes that the election was fraudulent and rigged, and I don't see anything in Biden's record, or more importantly, the people Biden has surrounded himself with, that indicates that he's going to respond to the deep malaise and antagonistic tribal divisions that are tearing apart the United States.
Very powerful, Chris. Thanks for that. Let's talk about who he is going to surround himself with. He repeatedly stated that he would be reaching out across the aisle to Republicans and offering them cabinet places. The early indications are that the one that matters most to me, I'll be candid with you, is the State Department, and that will go to Susan Rice, who was a creature of the Democratic Party's last war machine, the people who brought us the slave markets in Libya. Other Wall Street figures are apparently being lined up for the Treasury Department and so on. How bad, how ugly is this cabinet going to look?
My guess is very ugly. And Biden has said as much. He's made it very clear that if Medicare for all, in essence, universal health care, ever reached his desk, he would veto it. He would veto the Green New Deal. He has spoken to the 1%, or actually the 1% of the 1%, but the country's wealthiest individuals and biggest Democratic donors, saying that he will impose no regulation on Wall Street, and Wall Street is run amok, completely unregulated. He himself was one of the architects of the war in Iraq. He was one of the architects of the militarization of the police force and the massive expansion of the prison population. He has, throughout his political career, been utterly obsequious to the most retrograde forces of American imperialism and American capitalism. He used to be called, in the Senate, they used to call him Senator Credit Card, because a lot of the credit card companies, for tax reasons, are based in his home state in Delaware, which, by the way, the largest credit card company employed his son Hunter. And there wasn't a piece of legislation that their lobbyists didn't write that he pushed through. So I see nothing in his past. And I think the indications, as you correctly point out, are that those who are surrounding him will continue what the two ruling elites have essentially pushed forward, and that is extremely dangerous. He doesn't have either the moral or the intellectual capacity to do much else. He's a very limited, hollow figure. So I'm extremely worried, and in the long term, but also in the short term, because a lot of the Trump supporters, rightly or wrongly, believe that the election was stolen. A lot of them are armed, and I think that we have already seen close calls in terms of attempts to assassinate mainstream Democratic leaders, to kidnap the governors of Michigan and Virginia. They were actually going to put them on trial and execute them. We had a couple of years ago where a Trump supporter mailed pipe bombs to most of the hierarchy of the Democratic Party, along with CNN. If those had gone off, you would have decapitated the Democratic Party. And so it reminds me of Yugoslavia. I mean, eventually they're going to succeed. And I think that Trump will continue to incite his base. The divide is so wide that they don't trust the system. They don't trust the mainstream or liberal media outlets, and I have some sympathy for that, frankly. CNN, MSNBC, and they're almost unreachable. So that I just find, having covered the war in Yugoslavia, many, many echoes of the disintegration and breakdown in Yugoslavia that led to the horrible fratricide that I covered.
The trope of Trump, that he had gone down to big media, big tech, and big money, has the benefit of being true, doesn't it? Yeah.
Biden, I mean, you have to look at the super PACs that were set up largely by Silicon Valley and Wall Street. And they pumped tremendous sums of money into the Biden campaign. And they weren't doing it because they love democracy or they want universal health care or guaranteed personal income. They did it because they knew they would get what they paid for. And one of them is that there was this move to break up these big tech monopolies like Google and Facebook. That will never happen now because they were largely the major funders of the campaign. But I also want to add, not just the major funders. Those tech platforms used their ability to censor information to shut out information that was damaging to Biden. In particular, most recently, the revelations that came from Hunter Biden's laptop, which the Biden campaign never pretended that they were untrue. They never said that they were false. But you had, even in the New York Times, headlines calling it disinformation. And that goes back to Podesta, the Podesta emails in 2016. Podesta was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. Those were released by WikiLeaks. And the tech platforms caught a lot of the blame. So now, along with the mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Google, Facebook, they all did their job. But that's very dangerous. In the short term, of course, it helped the Democrats and helped get rid of Trump. But in the long term, it further eroded their credibility. I think there's very little credibility left now. I mean, these cater to the Democratic elites and to the Democratic constituency. The 91% of the readers of the New York Times identify as Democrats. And what you've done is siloed the country now within their own echo chambers, both on the left and the right. So as a former reporter for the New York Times, I was appalled because that credibility, willfully shredding that credibility means that you can't communicate with the rest of the country because you've exposed yourself as so partisan. So we're all happy to see Trump go, or many of us are happy to see Trump go. On the other hand, many of us are extremely concerned about what comes next.
Well, what happens immediately next? There has been an obvious recount, legally required, mandatory recount, triggered in Georgia. We don't know what that will turn up. But there are also a huge number of complaints about other places, particularly Pennsylvania and Michigan. Does Trump have any chance of getting this into the Supreme Court, in your view?
No, I don't think so. I think if it was down to one state, like Florida under Bush versus Gore, yes. But I think because it's multiple states, it's going to be hard for him to get through the legal system up to the Supreme Court. But that is not a particularly informed decision, but that's what I think.
What will Trump do now with his remaining 2 months? Might he, if only to cock a snook at the deep state that has apparently succeeded in overthrowing him, might he pardon Snowden and drop the charges against your friend and mine, Julian Assange?
Well, that would be the best Christmas gift ever. I don't know. I think he'll throw as many bombs as he can and be as destructive as he can towards these forces that, I mean, it honestly did conspire against him. You had the heads of former intelligence agencies and internal security agencies, the FBI, Brennan, others, pounding him for 4 years as a traitor and a puppet of Russia, et cetera, in essence, accusing him of treason. I think it would be completely in character for Trump to just destroy as much of the infrastructure as he could. That's what I expect.
Will he continue in politics, pass over the baton to one of his children, or are we looking at someone right field from out with the immediate Trump circle, but singing some of the same songs?
He'll definitely continue as a political figure because he's reshaped the Republican Party into a personality cult. And that's why people like Lindsey Graham, who are, when they ran in 2016, very dismissive of Trump, have been utterly obsequious to Trump because it's the only way they could get reelected. So he will remain a powerful political force. Remember that the second highest vote in American history after Biden's has been Trump's. So that gives him a lot of political leverage. And so much of the Republican base is personally loyal to him that he will be a political factor. Whether he runs again in the next election in 2024, I suspect not. I think you're going to see the rise of a far more competent and far more dangerous neo-fascist who will ride that sentiment that I suspect Biden and the Democratic Party will not address. And remember that the stresses within the American landscape because of the pandemic and the inability to deal with the pandemic are about to become much worse. So we have an estimated 300,000 Americans that will be dead by December. This figure is expected to rise to 400,000 in January. The unemployment numbers do not reflect real unemployment, which is probably close to 20%, because those who have stopped looking for work, those who have been furloughed but have no chance of being rehired, those who have jobs, part-time jobs, but still are below the poverty line, are all counted as employed. And the pandemic won't be brought under control because, as inept as Trump was, and he was inept in dealing with it, the fundamental problem is our privatized healthcare system, which is designed to make money. It's not designed to deal with a national health crisis. All we've seen over the last couple decades is a reduction. I mean, we have less than 1 million hospital beds, and this is all because of hospital mergers and closures and reduced care in communities, especially rural communities. You've seen major cities in the United States like Milwaukee forced to erect field tent hospitals. In states like Mississippi, they've had moments run out of ICU beds, and so you have the raging pandemic, but then you have the economic fallout from the pandemic, and we still have 48% of frontline workers in the United States who are not eligible for sick pay. We have over 40 million Americans who have lost their employee-sponsored health insurance. We have thousands of bankruptcies a day, many of them tied to exorbitant medical costs, even for people who have insurance because of what we call co-pays. And you have about 15 million renter households. That's about 34 million people who were unable to pay their rent in September. That's about 17 billion in unpaid rent. That figure is expected to rise to 34 billion in January, and it is accompanied by the lifting on evictions and foreclosures, which means millions of families, and Jared Kushner, who's a big slumlord, has already begun the process of evictions, millions of families thrown into the street. Hunger in U.S. households has tripled over the last year. These are government statistics. This is from the Department of Agriculture. The proportion of American children who don't have enough to eat is 14 times higher than it was last year. A study by Columbia University estimates that an additional 8 million Americans have now been can be classified as living in poverty. And meanwhile, of course, throughout the pandemic, the billionaire class has profited in obscene ways. The 50th richest Americans have as much wealth as half of the country. And it's not just African Americans and the poor and the working poor have been hit, but millennials, which is about 70 million people who have an estimated 4.6% of the U.S. wealth. So all of those stresses, and the country is already disintegrating, all of those stresses are going to put further pressure on a system that can't sustain stress.
Fasten your seatbelts. Chris Hedges, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. How's the poll doing? Has it been refreshed? I think not. Let me plug the phone numbers. The number in the UK is 02077 982 255. Or if you're in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us at George Galloway or at RTUK News, preferably at both of us. Yeah, here's the latest. So 1,488 people have voted, and 12% of you think Kamala Harris will take over immediately, 48% during next year, 40% in 2022 or later. You can still vote on my Twitter feed. Let me take a quick break.
Just like my game on the courses of Scotland, George. I'm coming out swinging. I'm in the rhythm of my life, and I'm sinking everything, George, on my way to term 2. My points have never been lower. The economy, my numbers speak for themselves. And if they could speak, they'd be like, "You're doing such a great job, Mr. President. You're so sexy." I am shooting so under par right now. So under par. I'm just always playing great.
It is me, Joe Biden.
It sure is, Joe. Be a guy and get my ball out of that bunker.
It is me, Joe Biden.
You never catch me in one of those, America. Another thing you'll never catch me doing is listening to the mother of all talk shows in the Washington, D.C. area on 105.5 are the magic numbers there. Or anywhere else across America, for that matter. I mean, what's left of it? Hashtag winning.
It is me, Joe Biden. It is me, Joe Biden.
God damn it, who would they let this guy run? Do they want me to be president?
Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Now, lots of people are engaging with our first poll. A general feeling is that Harris will take over within 6 months of the presidency, but people aren't happy about it. Many are questioning Biden's health and if he is even fit to stand. Alex says when Biden gets diagnosed with whatever he has, then she will. John says within 6 months, George, as was the plan all along. Johnny says the Democrats will move fast to get Joe out of the way so Kamala can begin dismantling the US Constitution. And Sean says first we have to wait until the lawsuits are over. The possibility of a Harris presidency will increase after the roller coaster of emotions that Biden is going to feel in these next few weeks. The heart rate will not be doing any favors to his health. Then we will see lots more where that came from. But let's take some calls. Eve is in Idaho. Always worth hearing from him. Eve, thanks for joining us.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
I wanted to tell you about the kind of a dream, I had. Is I imagine that in Venezuela, you have an election and Guaido is winning. It's midnight, and then people say, no, we stop counting, and the day after, Maduro, the count is completely different, and Maduro wins the election. I would like to know how the U.S. would spin that story. And so what I wanted to tell you is that I want to tell you the good and the bad about the thing. The good is that I think we have lost all the ground to interfere in Belarus, in Venezuela, in Syria, lecturing them about the election. I think we have the most rotten election that you can think of, and this is a good thing because I think this argument is going to lose a lot of weight. The other good thing is that I think that the situation with China, if Biden actually get there, will be, we are not going to go to war with China. The really bad thing is about Syria. I have followed this war very intensely since 2011, and I think that we are completely responsible of it, and I think it's going to get a lot worse. I think the conflict in Karabakh, the High Karabakh, is going to be much worse. The relation with Russia are much worse. And to finish, I just have a slight disagreement maybe with, I don't know what you think, but maybe with Chris Edge, is that I don't think it's over. I think it's going straight to the Supreme Court, and I don't know what they're going to do with it.
What's the path, though, to the Supreme Court? You have to get a local court to pass it upwards. How do you get to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think what you say is right. I mean, my small experience, with the court is things like real estate and things like that. And I can tell you that the first shot, you see, the lawyers usually, which are local, are not going to defend you because let's say a lawyer in Pennsylvania is working for Philadelphia. So you go from county to state, and after federal court, appellate court, you have to go the whole. But Giuliani knows that. I mean,
but you can't do all that before January, and the Constitution is very clear with the date in January, which a new president or a re-elected one must be sworn in.
Well, except that the Supreme Court can take any case they want. You see, they don't have to wait for the whole thing. If there have been a very simple case about a scientific book. I know this one. It was a kid who was in university, and he noticed that the book was cheaper in India and then the Supreme Court, they took the case. So the Supreme Court, in my opinion, they are made for that. They cost a lot of money. They are very independent. They are named for life. This is their case. I mean, but it's true that if they don't take the case, there may not be enough time. Yeah.
Okay, Eve, thanks for that call. Daniel is in Slough in England, but on the US election. Daniel, go ahead.
Hey, George. I love the show.
Thank you.
from a young committed socialist. Just want to say, love the show, sort of dedicated to it.
Thank you.
So just with regards to sort of the Biden and Trump, with the Biden and Trump thing, with you said that you weren't able to vote for either Biden or Trump.
No.
Largely, I can sympathise with that, but we've got to recognise it as a two-party system in the US, and Trump...
Well, Daniel, let me interrupt you for a minute. There's a two-party system here, and the reality is I could not vote for Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson. Could you?
I don't know. As a Labour Party member, tenuous as it is, I'd still rather...
You better be careful then. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll take that as a yes for Starmer.
I'd not for Starmer, but on the principle of Labour being better than a Tory, then I would vote with them. But prior to Corbyn, I would have never voted for Labour, to be honest. But with Trump, he was. I just want to take it on one point. He's a climate denier, in terms of climate change, and at the very least, at least Biden sort of recognises man-made climate change, and he said that he would join the Paris Climate Accord again.
Okay. Let's assume he does, and I don't think you can easily assume that because the Senate has to ratify that. Let's assume that he manages to get that through the Senate. If he's also blizzarding bombs and rockets down in other parts of the world, that won't be worth very much.
No, and I agree. My greatest fear is that the Democrats have a terrible record of exercising the military-industrial complex, and
for sure,
I really do fear of
Donald Trump is the first president not to start a new war.
You're right. And as a sort of Palestinian solidarity campaigner, I would argue that moving the embassy to Jerusalem was as much as a declaration of war as any. But you're right that he didn't start any foreign wars, which I really do fear that Biden will do. But in terms of the climate, just sort of bringing it back to the one point, the cause, I think that if I was to choose between two cheeks of the same arse, as you accurately say, it would be a case of Biden purely based on the fact that he recognises that there is man-made climate, and we really do need the world superpower to be on board with trying to make sure that the world doesn't melt around us,
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Excellent call. Federico is in London, but again on the US election. Federico, go on.
Yes, hello, George. I believe that the Democratic Party today is basically run by a clique of very militant, feminist, and militaristic people, such as Kamala Harris, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and the worst one of the lot, Hillary Clinton. I think they are an extremely dangerous clique. Hillary Clinton is waiting, in my opinion, in the behind the scenes to become the Secretary of State yet again, and as she did with Libya, the next country would be most probably Iran, because in spite of the economic sanctions on Iran, Iran's military and Iran's economy has actually benefited from the sanctions. And these people can see that sanctions are no solution. Therefore, they are going to go the military way. And, of course, all the inherent dangers that will entail, because a conventional war with Iran can simply not be won by United States in the Persian Gulf and Middle East area.
Okay, thanks, Federico. I think being the Secretary of State's rather too much like hard work for Hillary Clinton. I don't think she's at that stage in her life. If they had a queen, she'd take that. But as they don't, I think they'll try to pick the kings and queens from now on. Thanks for the call. Here's Richard in Georgia, a new caller. Richard, welcome.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you very much. How does it look where you sit?
Well, I have some information on the upcoming Senate runoffs. But first of all, I want to make my major point that we're all aware that the turnout was a giant record. And of course, Donald Trump got a record.
7 million extra votes, yeah.
Yeah, Donald Trump got a record in his own right, and then of course Joe Biden got the biggest vote ever. But I would say that much of Biden's vote total is actually the turnout was motivated by anti-Trump.
Sure.
So really, the massive record turnout is mostly due to Donald Trump, and Joe Biden was a bystander.
Yeah, sure, bemused bystander at that. And that partly explains, though I think not wholly, why Biden did so much better than his party down the ballot.
Yeah.
They did not win a single seat in the House of Representatives. In fact, they lost several, even while Biden was getting millions of ballots in his favor at the top of the ticket. A very unusual thing, Richard.
Yes. I'd also like to make a point. We're going to be the center of the universe January 5th with our 2 Senate runoffs, and it could be that the Democrats could need both of those to tie and therefore have the vice president be the breaking vote. The bad news for Democrats in Georgia, the runoffs almost always go to Republicans because they turn out more consistently, even when it's not a presidential election. So that's not good news. Another thing, one of the votes of David Perdue, the incumbent Republican, against John Ossoff, the challenger. David Perdue tied himself to Donald Trump, and he got almost the exact same vote in Georgia as Donald Trump did. John Ossoff underperformed Joe Biden, so that does not look good for Democrats either. The interesting one in that so-called jungle primary, which is nonpartisan, of course, you had 2 Republicans, one of which got knocked out, and the question is, will the one that lost, Doug Collins' votes, be bitter and not show up? I doubt it. In 2 months, I think all the Republicans will come home. And you add their 2 votes together, it comes out to about 47%. The Democrat that actually won with 33%, I believe, if you add in all the other Democrats, there were like 20 people on the ballot, you add that 15% to his, he's right up there at about 48% or so. So, but then it all comes down to turnout.
Down to turnout, yeah. And as you say, in these by-elections, the Republicans usually turn out more. Okay, thanks very much, Richard, for that. Let me squeeze in Frank in Paris. Frank, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, George.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, I'm just disappointed in the elections in the U.S. because I feel that the Middle East have been quiet for the last 4 years. Now Obama is coming back again with Joe Biden. I think I'm a little bit worried because I'm hearing Susan Rice is going back to the Secretary of State position. She's a war machine. Those are the people who organized the destruction of Libya and Syria. Now they are coming back again in power.
Yep.
Trump was never interested in arming people, giving people guns to go and destroy other people's country. This is one of the reasons why I admire Trump's leadership. So I'm a bit worried because Obama's influence on Joe Biden is going to rise on some of those countries again. Because Obama is in the background, but he's going to do everything to override Biden's presidency. I guess so.
Well, Biden owes Obama everything. He owes him the nomination in the first place, and arguably he was the most important factor during the campaign. And the gang that I described earlier, the Clinton-Obama-Biden gang, who caused such devastation around the world, are very definitely back. And the deep state and the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex are all cheering mightily at that. That's a fact, Frank. Thanks for making it. It was a very good call, but I have to go to the news very shortly with Jamie Lowe. But I said we had royalty on the show tonight. If Chris Hedges was the prince, then Rania Khalek is our princess. She's a journalist, presenter, and writer, and she's up in the second hour after the news. with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
US President-elect Joe Biden has said it's time to heal the United States in his first speech, vowing not to divide but to unify the country. Let's give each other a chance, he said at an event in Delaware, addressing those who didn't vote for him. Biden defeated incumbent President Donald Trump following a cliffhanger vote count after Tuesday's election. Trump has yet to concede and has not spoken publicly since his defeat was announced while he was playing golf. The result makes Trump the first one-term president since the 90s. His campaign has filed a barrage of lawsuits in various states, but election officials say there is no evidence that the vote was rigged against him, as he has said. Addressing cheering supporters in a car park in his hometown of Wilmington, Biden said, "I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide but to unify, who doesn't see the red and blue states, only sees the United States." Biden, who has won more than 74 million votes so far, the most ever for a US presidential candidate, hailed the diverse support he gathered during the campaign and thanked African American voters in particular. But he also reached out to Trump supporters directly. "It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again," he said. His running mate, Kamala Harris, in her first speech as vice president-elect said, "While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last." She made history in more ways than one, being the first female and first woman of African American and South Asian American descent to get the job. Earlier, in a video posted to her social media, she was seen saying, we did it, Joe, you're going to be the next president of the United States." The French Prime Minister, Emmanuel Macron, has warned the second wave of coronavirus has brutally and violently arrived in the country after almost 90,000 cases were recorded in a single day. The figure of 86,852 COVID-19 cases reported by the country's health ministry for Saturday is a record high for the third day in a row, authorities said, although they added that there had been accidental underreporting earlier in the week. Total coronavirus cases in France have reached 1,748,705, the fifth highest tally globally, and linked deaths have also exceeded 40,000. Some 27,660 people are being treated in hospital. Back here in England, and hospitals in Greater Manchester are treating more COVID patients than at the peak of the first wave, resulting in non-urgent care being suspended. Non-urgent hospital surgery and appointments will not go ahead as planned, as coronavirus admissions have increased by 64 patients in just a week. Urgent and emergency care, such as cancer treatment, will continue. Before a nationwide lockdown came into force in England on Thursday, Greater Manchester had been in the highest level of the three-tier system of restrictions. The government is to spend more than £400 million to support poor children and their families in England, following a campaign by footballer Marcus Rashford. A winter grant scheme to be run by councils will provide support with food and bills, and a holiday food and activities programme is to be expanded. Rashford said it would improve the lives of almost 1.7 million children. The move represents a climb down for the government, which has said universal credit was the best way to help. The Queen has led Britain in marking Remembrance Sunday, as people around the UK privately paid their respects at home due to the coronavirus pandemic. She was joined by family members and the Prime Minister at the scaled-back service at the Cenotaph in London's Whitehall. Social distancing measures were in place and the service was closed off to the public for the first time. Normally, Whitehall is packed with thousands of veterans and members of the military for commemorations, but on Sunday, less than 30 veterans were in attendance. Millions have voted in Myanmar's general election, just the second since the military rule ended in 2011. It comes just 5 years after Aung San Suu Kyi won a landslide victory and entered into a power-sharing agreement with generals who still hold huge power in the country. Suu Kyi remains popular in Myanmar and is expected to win. But the Nobel Peace Prize winner and global icon has dramatically fallen from grace internationally for her response to the Rohingya crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim Rohingyas fled an army crackdown in 2017. Observers have questioned the credibility of the election because of the disenfranchisement of virtually all Rohingya. Azerbaijan has captured a key town in the separatist Nagorno-Karabakh region, according to the country's president. Ilham Aliyev announced in a televised address on Sunday that Azerbaijani forces had taken Shusha, known as Sushi in Armenian. Armenia, however, denied the town's capture and said fighting was ongoing. Capturing the strategically important town would be a major victory for Azerbaijan in the ongoing conflict over the disputed territory. Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognised as part of Azerbaijan, but is governed by ethnic Armenians backed by the Armenian government. Up to 150 people are feared to have been killed in a landslide in Guatemala after Storm Eta lashed Central America with torrential downpours. Many of those who lost their lives in the remote mountain village of Cueja in the country's central region of Alta Verapaz were buried in their homes under mud, according to authorities. The devastating weather front has wreaked havoc from Panama to Honduras and Mexico, which between them have recorded more than 50 flood-related deaths. And finally, Donald Trump's attempt to remain at the White House turned into farce, as his legal team ended up having to hold a press conference outside a landscape gardening firm and next to an adult bookstore and a crematorium. Instead of the Four Seasons Hotel in Philadelphia, it ended up happening at Four Seasons Total Landscaping on the outskirts of the city. Trump had put out in a now-deleted tweet that there would be a big press conference at the Four Seasons in Philadelphia. However, as the still incumbent president played golf and continued to say the election was stolen from him, the upmarket Four Seasons Hotel had to make clear that it was not involved in the Rudy Giuliani press conference. The event eventually went ahead in the car park of the garden centre. The unusual location and confusion has been meat and drink on social media, with thousands, including comedians, lapping up the situation, weighing in with jokes and memes. Some compared the bizarre occasion to something from a political satire programme, such as the BBC's The Thick of It or the US comedy Veep. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, across the channels this evening, we've got many disputing really how credible Biden is as a president. One comment said, if you have to choose the lesser of two evils, is it time we just did something to get rid of the evil? Harry says, though, it's one of the best ones, at least the smell of fertilizer wafting through the air at the Four Seasons Landscaping Centre will help disguise the political BS. I find that story so extraordinarily funny. But the big picture is, of course, very far from funny. Let's talk with Rania Khalek, journalist, presenter, broadcaster, writer, and up there with the very best of political pundits in the United States. Rania, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to see you. I want to ask you mostly about what the impact on foreign policy of a Biden presidency will be. But first, what's your take on the election and where we stand? Will Biden's presidency stand? Will it be quickly swept away by the courts? What do you think is going to happen?
I think his presidency will stand. I don't think he'll last more than one term. And I actually think that the Democratic Party, rather than celebrating in the streets, should be scared right now. While it's wonderful that Trump was defeated because we had a COVID pandemic that he completely botched and because the economy crashed. I really do believe had it not been for the pandemic, he likely would have won a second term. And I find it quite alarming, and the Democratic Party should find it alarming, that 70 million people still came out and voted for Donald Trump. And they don't want to or seem interested in examining why that happened. Trump was able to maintain a fairly solid base that he built back in 2016. Those same people came out and voted for him on top of even more people than in 2016. So this is a solid base of populist right-wing support that isn't going anywhere just because Democrats managed to squeeze in a win. And I think it's there's a very strong lack of understanding of the Trump phenomena and what led to his rise. And you can tell because Democrats gave us another corporate hawkish candidate to go up against Trump at a time when we needed left-wing populism. They gave us the exact recipe that lost to Trump in 2016. And now they've created a situation where they're going to go back to the very same policies, the very same collapsing neoliberalism that led to the ignorance and hate that gave us Donald Trump. We're going to have another 4 years of that, and it's going to be a failure because people are miserable. Inequality is rising. They're going to continue to be miserable. And when it comes into another 4 years from now, you're going to have a situation where either we're going to have like another Trump run and he's going to reinvigorate his base again and spend the next 4 years campaigning for re-election in 2024. Or what's even scarier is you're going to have a situation where somebody even more charming and effective than Donald Trump will come along on the right and just sweep into victory on this sort of momentum of hatred for the establishment that's very real and still exists in America across the country.
Yeah, very real. And of course, the establishment funded and facilitated the Biden victory. Trump is not wrong when he said he was up against big tech, big media, and big money. This is indisputably true. Now, the establishment in the Democratic Party is back. They're talking about Susan Rice, for example, the architect of the disastrous foreign policy of the Barack Obama presidency, the Obama-Biden presidency. She's a surrogate of Hillary Clinton. She's going to be in charge of U.S. foreign policy, everyone seems to think. So although the American bombers might play kumbaya as they're taxiing down the runway and might have the rainbow flag painted on their tail fin, they're going to be back to killing people quite soon.
Well, I mean, I would argue they also never really stopped. But yeah, when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, there is this kind of consistency that is maintained regardless of who is in charge. I think there'll be some slight differences in a Biden administration that are mostly personal. Like, I do think that Joe Biden will likely try to go back to some version of the Iran nuclear deal because he participated in helping to negotiate it under the Obama administration. But that said, there are very few areas where these two parties on foreign policy diverge. It's exactly what you just said, right? One drops bombs while telling you they're dropping bombs on you and that they hate you, and the other drops bombs while saying they support, equal rights and claps when a woman is doing it, right? And we're going to have Kamala Harris in the vice presidency, getting her chance to slay as the first woman of color in that position. And we also have, Joe Biden is going to just resurrect the foreign policy establishment. He's going to put them back into the positions they were in before Donald Trump came in and kind of hollowed out the State Department and hollowed out the Department of the Defense. So what you might actually see is a more effective operation of U.S. empire under a Biden administration, just because it'll be more competent. And, it'll function better because you won't have somebody like Trump in charge who just is confused and disagrees and doesn't really, know how to carry out, his daily duties. So that is, that is a bit frightening to think about, how that's going to manifest around the world. It's not going to be good for Latin America. It's not going to be good for the Middle East. And I think you're going to also see a more hawkish stance, if that even is possible, against China. And I think that the U.S. was already headed in that direction, right? This sort of great power competition with China. So I think you're going to see a Biden administration come on, hard about resurrecting the new Cold War against China, maintaining this new Cold War against Russia. So it's going to be the same hawkish stuff that you saw before Trump was in office and even while Trump was in office. but it's just going to be run more effectively.
Let's focus on the Arab Middle East. You've made the point, I agree with it, about the Iran nuclear deal. But in the Arab Middle East, the unfinished business of the Obama, Clinton, Biden gang was the overthrow of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Is it too late for them to resurrect their war in Syria? And if it isn't too late, do you think they will?
I don't see them going back to arming the rebels in Syria because that already died down. In fact, at the end of the Obama administration, they had already started to end that funding stream and that armament that actually just continued into the Trump administration that actually started under Obama at the end of his last term. So I think they were already kind of just done with that. I think what you're going to see is this continued suffocation of Syria through these heavy-handed Caesar sanctions. I don't think Biden's going to come along and undo that. So I think you're going to actually see the same policy that you've seen under Trump continue to be implemented. They're going to continue to occupy Syria, but instead of telling you like Trump did that they're doing it to guard the oil fields, they'll tell you that they're doing it for some human rights purpose or some other, lie, like to help the Kurds or something. So they'll continue to do what the U.S. has been doing. They're just going to say they're doing it for polite reasons rather than be honest with you that they're just being belligerent bullies.
On the other hand, Trump and his family, particularly his son-in-law, had quite extraordinary relationship with the Saudi strongman MBS. Biden is unlikely to have that relationship. Indeed, Saudi Arabia hasn't yet congratulated him on his election victory. They must be a little bit anxious, mightn't they? Especially as Biden has a pledge, whether he'll keep it or not is another matter, to try and bring about an end to the Yemen war.
Yeah, so that's actually one area where there could be differences. Biden has promised to stop arming Saudi Arabia against Yemen. That could quite possibly happen because the U.S. doesn't really have an interest in doing that anymore. And it's, I think for people like MBS and Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates, these people were really controlling U.S. policy in the region. They were getting whatever they wanted from Jared Kushner and Mike Pompeo. So, and they also played a role in trying to help Trump get reelected. We always talk about foreign interference, but it's just, never something that's on the table to discuss when it comes from the Israelis or from the Emiratis or from the Saudis. But yeah, these three countries, the governments of these three countries are definitely going to be very upset because they're basically losing an ally in the White House who literally would give them whatever they wanted. That said, you're not going to see a significant change, I don't think, in policy towards Saudi Arabia or towards Israel. Israel will keep getting its $3 billion in military aid every year, just like it's, gotten for the last several decades under both parties, no matter who's in charge. Saudi Arabia will continue to receive mostly unconditional support. I mean, when it comes to the Democratic Party, you do hear some murmurs of criticism of Saudi human rights abuses and the way they treat women. But it's really just rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything in substance. It's just symbolic. So, I mean, yes, I don't want to pretend there aren't differences between these two. But at the end of the day, overall, you're not going to see that dramatic of a shift beyond maybe Yemen. And you'll see a bit of a more reasonable diplomatic tone taken with Iran.
The Latin America, which you referred to, I just saw a quote from Biden boasting that he was in the front demanding recognition of Juan Guaido as president of Venezuela. He's been absolute hawk on sanctions against Venezuela, against Nicaragua. I don't think there's going to be much relief in Latin America.
I agree with you. And, let's remember that it was under Obama that those sanctions against Venezuela began, that Trump, and Mike Pompeo doubled down on or tripled down on. So Venezuela is going to continue to be strangled by sanctions. Democrats never come in and undo sanctions. That doesn't typically happen. So, they're going to come in, they're going to keep the same policies in place. You're not going to see much of a difference in Latin America. Perhaps with Cuba, you might, because Obama did relieve sanctions on Cuba and end the embargo. And then Trump, Trump relaunched those policies. So that might change. But that said, after Democrats lost so much support from the right-wing Latin Americans in Miami, they might try to reposition themselves as popular among them by, trying to continue to overthrow the governments of their countries.
I don't think that they can hawk the Republicans in Florida. If I were the Democrats, I'd draw a circle around Florida and say we're not going to win that in even a good year. Rania Khalek, thank you so much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much appreciated, as always. So when will Kamala take over as president? The poll's going well, nearly 2,000 people. But there is a piece of information on it that I should read to you, which I must confess I did not know. It says this: the Constitution states that if the vice president became the president in the first 2 years, they can only stand for presidential election one time. If Biden hands over in 2 years and 1 day into the first term, Harris can stand in 2024 and 2028, thus potentially a 10-year presidency. That is a very interesting piece of constitutional news from Dan, for which I am grateful. Let me take a 60-second break. Stay tuned.
Oh, Johnny, how you can love.
Stop banging on the toilet door, Amber. Stop banging on the toilet door. You're gonna frighten the pilot. Anyway, I'll talk to you when we land. Although that could take a considerable amount of time.
Oh, Johnny.
Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Okay, you can still vote on my poll on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, this is the spot where I look back at the 7 days which shaped our present and no doubt our future. This is the week in all our histories. They sought him here, they sought him there, but they couldn't find him anywhere. It was on this day in 1974 that the Metropolitan Police said they were looking for Lord Lucan following the murder of his children's nanny and an attack on his estranged wife. They never did find him. The 7th Earl of Lucan, aged 39, had not been seen since the day before. 7 months later, an inquest jury declared him guilty of murder. Neither he nor his body had ever been found. Ireland elected its first woman president in 1990. Mary Robinson, who was standing as an independent, took nearly 40% of the vote in the first round. On this day in 2000, the result of the American presidential election, much like this one, was still hanging in the balance after the polls had long officially closed. Texas Governor George Bush was eventually declared president-elect on 13 December after a protracted legal battle. The vote in Florida went to a hand count, but it turned out thousands of votes had been discarded by automatic machines because voters were supposed to knock out a small rectangle of card next to their choice of candidate, and many were not punched properly. This was the hanging Chad's election. The decision eventually went to the Supreme Court, perhaps like this one, before Bush was finally declared the winner. It helped, of course, that George Bush's brother was the governor of Florida. In 1960, on October the 9th, Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK, emerged as the new President of the United States, beating Vice President Richard Nixon by a slim margin. His term ran for just 2 years before he was assassinated in Dallas on 22nd November 1963, an event that left the nation, and not just that nation, totally stunned. One of the greatest figures in the history of France, General Charles de Gaulle, died at his home of a heart attack in this week in 1970. He was 79. The wartime hero and former president was playing patience and watching television when he suddenly slumped in his chair. Who knew a card game could turn fatal? If you see me about to play patience, please take the cards off me. And in 1989, the Berlin Wall was breached after nearly 3 decades keeping East and West Berliners apart, it says here. At midnight, East Germany's rulers gave permission for gates along the wall to be opened after hundreds of people converged on crossing points. On October 10th, 1960, bookshops all over Britain sold out of Penguin's first run of the controversial, saucy, it says here, novel Lady Chatterley's Lover. A total of 200,000 copies were sold on the first day of publication. Within a year, the book, which would be considered pretty mild today, had sold 2 million copies, outselling even the Bible. And the Labour Party chose left-wing MP Michael Foot, God rest his soul, as its new leader in 1980. The following year, senior Labour figure Roy Jenkins joined the Gang of Three to defect from the party, forming the centrist Social Democratic Party. That worked out well. And I dumped his ample, well-upholstered backside out of Parliament just a few years later. And in 1965, the Rhodesian government, led by Prime Minister Ian Smith, illegally served its links with the British Crown in a unilateral declaration of independence. Armed resistance from guerrilla movements continued until white rule formally ended in June 1979, when Abel Muzorewa of the African National Congress became the first black prime minister of the newly named Zimbabwe Rhodesia. But the real leader, Robert Mugabe, was elected prime minister of an independent Zimbabwe in 1980 under a new constitution. In 2004, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat died in his hospital bed in Paris, aged 75. And I was there at his bedside. On the 12th of October in 1997, the great train robber Ronald Biggs celebrated after Brazil rejected a British request to extradite him. However, in 2001, having suffered 2 strokes, Biggs returned to Britain voluntarily to receive medical treatment, which he could not afford in Brazil. What did he do with all that money? He was later taken to the top security Belmarsh prison in southeast London to serve out the remaining 28 years of his sentence. He was released from prison on compassionate grounds in August 2009 and died in a nursing home in December 2013. The Times, the Thunderer, appeared once more in this week in 1979, having been off the streets for nearly a year as a result of industrial action. New technology introduced at Wapping later resulted in 4,000 print workers losing their jobs. And 2 Libyan intelligence officers were accused of masterminding the Lockerbie bombing. On November 14th, 1991, the United States called on Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi to hand over the 2 men, Abdel Basit Ali al-Magrahi and Alamin Khalifa Fihima. After years of wrangling, Gaddafi finally allowed them to be tried in a neutral country under Scottish law. In January 2001, al-Magrahi was jailed for life following an 84-day trial at Camp Zeist in the Netherlands. His alleged accomplice, Fima, was found not guilty. Al-Megrahi served his sentence at Barlinnie Prison in Glasgow in a specially built isolation unit dubbed Gaddafi's Cafe. After he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer, Al-Megrahi was released from prison on compassionate grounds on the 20th of August 2009, having served 8.5 years of a life sentence. But he lived on for almost 3 years. Well, that's it. Another momentous 7 days from our past. So, where am I now? When will Kamala Harris take over as president from Joe Biden? Immediately, 12%. 2021, 51%. I agree with that still because I don't see how Joe Biden lasts. 2022 or later, 37%. Okay, let's take some calls. Kieran is in Ireland on Harris and Biden. Kieran, welcome.
Good evening, George. Just a quick comment to everyone that hears my voice. All the leftists out there that hear my voice, that were screaming last year, believe all women, me too. Go online and watch Kamala Harris when she retired from the primary elections. She's on video. This is not out of context. She was asked about Joe Biden's past history. It's starting to come up to like Tara Reid accused him of sexual assault. Various women have. She is quoted verbatim as saying, "I believe all the women that accuse Joe Biden of sexual assault." That's what she said, right? Now, she's a vice president. Okay, this is the same woman that sat in a radio studio, a black music, rap music or something, like gangster rap or something, a studio. She told the two black presenters she smoked marijuana when she was younger, while she was locking up huge numbers of black men. Huge, just for marijuana, not for robbing.
Thousands and thousands.
And not only that, not for robberies, armed robberies, nothing like that, not murder, just for smoking marijuana, okay? By the thousands, kept them in prison over the sentences, worked them like slaves, and she was a slave owner. Her family were slave owners, by the way, in Jamaica. Let's get that clear. Then, to compound all that, she said, "Oh yes, and I did inhale." And if that wasn't bad enough, the two presenters said to her, "Well, what kind of stuff you listen to?" And she goes, "I was listening to Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre." This was about 10 years or 5 years before Snoop Dogg even wrote one song. Never mind release a CD. So this is the character. You can check. This isn't out of context. This is all facts. This is the character. And by the way, when she was crawling up the greasy pole, it was more than a greasy pole she crawled up. And I don't want to be vulgar. Her boyfriend, she was having an affair with. I think was it the mayor of Chicago? She was having an affair with. He was in his 60s when she was like in her 30s. Okay, he got her jobs. So this is the character. Now, this is the character of the woman that is going to be a president and I think by next year. Okay, she's a lawyer. She will throw. I mean, listen. I don't want to get too personal. I was sexually abused as a child. So when I say and mentally and physically abused, when I see people like Biden, and it was by a headmaster of a primary school here in Ireland, and he was the nicest guy in the community. He was so respectable. So when I see people like Joe Biden being put up as president, and people like CNN and all the left, and you want to hear the news reporters over here on the radio stations over here. You know, Pat Kenny in particular, a good friend of Bill Clinton, by the way, a rapist, has paid off people for sexual assault and for asking for sexual assault, was on Epstein's plane at least 26 times. So we have people over here that are lauding Joe Biden, that are lauding Bill Clinton.
Well, he's got the Irish brogue. He's got the crack, and he self-defines as Irish, and for some fools that's good enough. Kieran, thanks for that. Here's Rory, also in Ireland, in Belfast. Go ahead, Rory.
How you doing? I am indeed in Ireland. My name's Rory. Thanks. I'm in Bangor, County Down.
On you go, sir.
North of Ireland. Good evening. Lovely to chat to you. A man of integrity, a man I've admired for many, many years.
Thank you, sir.
I hope you're doing well. So, yeah, I really wanted to chat here in the UK, especially in Northern Ireland. The main issue, well, certainly what should be the main issue outside of coronavirus, of course, is Brexit. Yeah, we're at a massively looming time. The deadlines are looking crazy. Things are looking all sorts of horrible and horrifying. Specifically, the issue is that Boris's cartel of incompetent, bumbling fools seem hell-bent on a hard Brexit. As you well know more than anyone, George, and I know that you're tremendously well-versed on Irish politics and in the situation here, and you've been instrumental, and I've been to talks of yours here and seen you speak on, and as you do for marginalised communities all around the globe, but I know you know better than anyone that the Good Friday Agreement needs to be upheld. Now, Boris's current bumbling and buffooning and so on for the last year plus has threatened, as you know, stability and peace within Northern Ireland to a great degree. We need to ensure seamless movement of trade and people throughout the island of Ireland. If that doesn't happen, George, imagine what might happen here in Belfast. Imagine what might happen right across Ireland if we get a hard border.
Well, look, I don't think you're going to be disappointed, Rory, and other people will be disappointed, but I don't think you're going to be disappointed with the results of the deal that I firmly believe will be announced this coming week. But I've got to make this point to you. I don't know why it's me that needs to make it. The best way of ensuring seamless trade and seamless travel throughout the island of Ireland is for the island of Ireland to be reunited. And that is also a part of the Good Friday Agreement. But it seems to me the current predilection of people in the north of a Republican persuasion to imagine that it's the Tory Prime Minister of Britain's responsibility. Actually, no, it is the people of Ireland's responsibility to take their own future into their own hands under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement by having a border poll and allowing the people north and south to decide. But anyway, it's not going to come to that, Rory, because I think you at least will be happy with the deal that Boris signs this week. I've got to go to Carlos in Los Angeles. Carlos, go ahead.
Hi, George. Thank you very much for taking my call.
You're welcome.
So, first of all, congratulations for the birth of your daughter, and because of most extra too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So now, what I wanted to talk about is an idea that I heard first from a Mexican geopolitical analyst. His name is Dr. Alfredo Jalife. And he said that if Biden is removed and replaced by Kamala, she's her vice president, she's vice president, then she would choose Hillary Clinton as vice president. So that would basically mean that we voted for a Harris-Clinton ticket that could very well last 10 years.
I don't think that could happen, Carlos. Let me stop you for a minute. I don't think that actually could happen because the vice president in those circumstances would have to be picked by the U.S. Senate. And Hillary Clinton is now, of course, merely a private citizen.
Oh. I thought that the vice president was the one that would pick, or the new president would be the one that would pick the vice president.
I might be wrong, and no doubt American viewers and listeners will set me right if I'm wrong. But as I understand it, the nomination of the vice president, a vacancy, would have to come from the U.S. Senate. And in any case, I've got to tell you, from what I can see of Kamala Harris, the last thing in the world she's going to do is put Hillary Clinton in behind her, because she knows, as you do, that Clinton would be ready to push her over the banister in the White House. Carlos, last word to you.
Oh, that's great to hear, because I was saying, like, you were very scared that, well, not scared, but very happy that she wasn't the president.
Yeah.
But now with this,
no, I think she's finished. She's a busted flush. She's a power behind the throne, no doubt. But I don't think you'll see her in public office anytime soon. Carlos in Los Angeles, thanks for the call. Stay with me. A 2-minute break. Call me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Don't bring up a false name. Come on air. Call me and let's have this matter out.
Let's get ready to rumble!
How have you got the nerve to tell people to Brexit if you're not telling them the repercussions?
That's 2016's argument, Michael. I'm no longer arguing with you about the merits of Brexit. I'm arguing with you about democracy, about the right of the majority to have their decision, their vote implemented.
This match will get red hot.
Not have a referendum. Let them have a referendum. Let them sort it out amongst themselves.
I want a referendum. Robert, I want a referendum. Let me put that in capital letters. If you think this year of 2020, which is shaping up already to be an annus miserabilis for the SNP, if you think this is your year, go ahead. Come on. Let's have it out.
It's on.
But no, George, it's not as simple as that, right? Have you seen the documentary about Cambridge Analytica and the people who work there? Have you looked at the global
I know nothing about them. I'm not interested in them.
Precisely. But
I'm not
interested. About them.
I'm not interested in them, Bruce, because it's all a red herring. Just like Russiagate was a red herring.
You're up.
Do you only want to hear voices that agree with you? Because if you do, you're not clever enough to be at this open university of the airwaves. In fact, you need to go back to remedial and learn something about what democracy and freedom of speech actually mean.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Well, I've got so much written material. I'm sorry I'm not going to get through all of it. Martin says no difference between both parties in America. At least Trump didn't start a war anywhere. Don't hold your breath with this one, though. I shan't, Martin. And Michael says, I will always stand with Trump no matter what happens. Mahmoud says the Democrats and the Republicans are two sides of the same coin. Or as George would say, two cheeks of the same backside. No difference. Indeed. And Joe says, Julius Nyerere, the Tanzanian leader, once said, and he quotes, the United States is also a one-party state, but with typical American extravagance, they've got two of them. And Charlie says, come on, George, for all Trump's supposed faults, there is one certainty. He is no warmonger. The first president to not start a war since Eisenhower. He's bringing the troops home. Well, he's always saying he is, Charlie, but they never actually get home. He is facilitating peace deals across the Middle East with Israel. He's facilitating peace deals with countries that were not at war with Israel in the first place. And Nadia says we can never guess what will happen and how the Biden policies are going to be. The world has changed, and people are now more aware of US policy than ever. And Thomas says, for all those who think this so-called president-elect is a nicer and more cuddly guy than Trump, think again. Let's hear from Sarkar in Glasgow. Always welcome. Sarkar, go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. Good evening. So nice to see you back after your surgery. Really happy to see you.
Thank you.
George, my question basically, and you must have guessed it, it's the US election results.
Yeah.
Now, all over the world, the liberals, actually I don't call them liberals anymore, I call them something else which I cannot use. The leftists are rejoicing at the fact that Joe Biden has won, that Donald Trump, supposedly the most evil man alive, is, not winning this election. Had these people just gone a bit further in history, and I'm not talking just further only between 2016 to 2020, from 2008 till 2016, Syria, Libya has been incinerated, ravaged, when this gentleman was the vice president with Barack Obama, the other hero of the liberals. No one knows what's happening of Syria and Libya for the next 50 years. No one. No Nostradamus can predict that. And this man, along with, of course, the State Secretary Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, we know what they have done. I don't understand. I'm not a Trump fan, I'm telling you honestly, but that man did not start any war. Compared to what these guys have done in their administration and the Bush administration, Donald Trump seems like, a peacemaker.
Well, not
I'm not a Trump
quite.
fan.
Not quite. Just not as bad as them. That's the best way to put it.
Absolutely. And see, can I ask you something? What makes these people believe that Joe Biden will literally do that thing which, will be like some kind of a beacon of peace, when literally the entire country is divided in such a way that I personally believe Trumpism or his fan base of 60-odd million voters, they are here to stay for quite some time.
Actually, got nearly 71 million votes. His vote went up by 7 million. It was 5 million higher than Hillary Clinton's vote in 2016. He doubled his support amongst gay people that we heard earlier. He doubled his support amongst black women. He doubled his support amongst black men. He had 58% of American women voted for Donald Trump. Get your head around all of that. Sarkar, thanks for the call. Now, here's a terrific message from David. I hope that Chris Hedges is still watching, because I strongly endorse this message. Chris Hedges is one of the most able men of this generation. If he was Secretary of State under a Jesse Ventura presidency, with Garland Nixon as the White House spokesman, that really would make America great again. Hallelujah, David. Very good. Giordano is in London. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, hello, George. Hi, what a pleasure to actually speak to you and make a couple of questions. I'm actually I follow every single podcast and anything that I can find of Chris Hedges. I find him an incredible.
He's totally wonderful, wonderful.
He truly is, and I hope actually on that front. My question was under, but just on that front, a kind of coalition of Ralph Nader, Jesse Ventura, and Chris Hedges, and you actually see kind of maybe this diaspora, that is both happening in both the Labour Party in the UK and also, let's say, the Democratic Party, where you just read now, let's say, a person like AOC actually shifting towards. Actually probably breaking up from the Democratic Party, and things like, let's say, like podcasts like Joe Rogan that seem completely out of the blues and so on. I completely support what he says, but there is actually a lot of of people actually that would really wish for Jesse Ventura or Ralph Nader or a Chris Hedges,
I believe that a third party, a people's party in the United States, is now unavoidable and inevitable, but also desperately, urgently required. Just like here in Britain, where the two sides of the same coin, Labour and the Conservatives, the Democrats and the Republicans will never resolve these issues that the American people face. Only new leadership, entirely new leadership, with a new course, a left populist course, rather than a liberal, neoliberal clash with the far right. Nothing good can come out of that. Only a new course which needs to be set. Last word to you, sir.
The question for me was a little bit like spiny one, in the sense of the whole thing of Jeremy Corbyn was astounding, in the sense that even a newspaper like The Guardian were putting anti-Semitism and Jeremy Corbyn, these kind of constructive headlines, to kind of make this feeling that
never was the word even more odious than in your sentence there. The Guardian cannot be said to be even The Guardian. The Guardian was the leading edge in the destruction of Jeremy Corbyn.
And exactly, and my question was this: look, I could argue for any ethnicity, any kind of between, or any kind of idealism that is, a minority from LGBTQ to black people to Muslims and so on. There, I have no doubt there is actually, serious problems of hatred being cast towards them. But look, anti-Semitism, first of all, anti-Semitism, Semitic language can be both an Arabic language and
but we know what we're
Hebrew.
talking about here. We're talking about hatred of Jews. And hatred of Jews is a real thing. And moreover, moreover, it's a real thing which in the lifetime of people alive today saw millions of people exterminated in the gas chambers. So I won't allow anyone to minimize the foulness and the danger of anti-Semitism. Go ahead.
What I meant to say is actually directly related to that, in the sense yes, of course, it was a horrifying thing, and this thing actually does exist, but why don't we ever talk about whoever else was in the gas chambers? Why is it that this kind of excuse of these gas chambers can be just recycled for these past 80 years to actually do some of the really, actually end up kicking out a guy like Jeremy Corbyn once he actually was one of the main people fighting against anti-Semitism.
Well, exactly. If he'd been alive at the time, he would have been in the forefront fighting fascism and anti-Semitism. Thanks for that. Let me take a quick break so I can have a proper cough.
Hello, mother of all talk shows.
Hello.
Yes?
Who is this?
Who are you trying to reach?
What number is this?
What number are you trying to reach?
I don't know.
Well, I think you have the wrong number.
Do I?
You do. Take it easy. Hi, mother of all talk shows.
Why don't you want to talk to me?
Who is this?
If you tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
That's one of our jingles. We're in an ad break.
Really?
Look, you're being a nightmare. What do you want to talk about?
What's your worst nightmare?
Currently, you?
Come on. What's your worst nightmare?
Well, the planet's on fire, the economy's ruined, social decency is dead, the north of England might as well be Europe, and I've just been declined universal credit. Hello?
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Quite a lot on Corbyn, actually. Corbyn appeased the crocodiles and got eaten last, says Carl. He says more, but it's a bit unkind. I can't bring myself to read it. And Lar says Corbyn's downfall as a political leader was that he was too nice to his political enemies. The lesson from the Corbyn project is deal with political enemies ruthlessly. Sir Keir seems to have learnt that. And Joseph said, I left the Labour Party this year after 40 years because of what you said. It's true. Corbyn was the man and was stabbed in the back by people like Emily Thornberry. And Mark says, please tell us what you know on the Brexit talks. We're all being bombarded with US election news and COVID news. Brexit has gone off the radar. What is happening? We'll, I'm sure, cover it very extensively next Sunday. But if you want to subscribe to my Patreon, I'm starting something this week because we've ended the trial of the Moats Extra. Not enough people took it up. I'm going to start what I'm calling RRBs, Rapid Radio Bursts. So it'll be more guerrilla, just me and my wife or me and young James. It'll be immediate and an immediate response to breaking news. And you can either catch it live on my Patreon page or you can look back at it when you get in from work or back into the House or when you're able to watch it. So these RRBs will start this week, probably tomorrow. And I have no doubt that Brexit will be a major part of that exercise in the course of the next week or two. Let's hear from Phil in Bristol. Go ahead, Phil.
Yes, hi. Hi, George. Thanks for doing this. I just wanted to point out that there's now been a shift in policy and foreign policy because Trump came in on a platform of non-interventionism, and he reflected the consensus, really, the majority consensus that there should not be any foreign wars. And as you pointed out, he didn't actually start a foreign war, and in fact, he stopped one because one of his advisors wanted him to attack Iran.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's happened now is you've got this guy Biden, who is a warmonger, and I just wanted to point out some of the things he's done in his voting record. One is in 2003 he voted for the invasion of Iraq, which turned the whole country into a lawless civil war, and then eventually ended up with ISIS. And then he has supported Obama's intervention in the Yemen civil war, also in the Libyan war, which is the overturn of Gaddafi that we've now seen has ended up in another chaotic mess, which, by the way, has put back the status of women by about 100 years in that country.
Yeah.
And also he has backed Saudi Arabia. He's backed airstrikes on Syria, and he's, of course, he's supported sending more troops into Afghanistan. This is
in fact, he's attacking Trump from the right on foreign policy things.
Exactly.
He's attacking Trump, for example, for dealing with North Korea, for meeting with the president of North Korea. He's trying to out-hawk Donald Trump, the Republican president.
Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I also want to point out with Israel is that he is refusing to say that there is an occupation of Israel. That is the line of the Democratic policy program, is that they are not acknowledging that there is an occupation of Israel, even though the UN has acknowledged there is an occupation of Israel. And he's not wanting to use conditional aid as a leverage on the actions of Israel in the Palestinian territories.
Nobody will use it on the Palestinians.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, he said that he will reinstate the aid that Trump cancelled to the Palestinians, but I'm pretty sure that it will have political conditions attached to it, aren't you?
Yes, of course. And he has said nothing against this awful coalition that happened with Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the UAE against the Palestinians. He said nothing about that. And I'm sure you've covered, I came in a bit late on your program, but I'm sure you've covered the law that he wrote in 1994,
sure.
The three strikes out.
Sure.
3 strikes and you're right. You covered that already.
We did extensively. Great call, Phil. Don't be a stranger. It was great to hear from you. Now, let me go straight to the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
US President-elect Joe Biden has said it's time to heal the United States in his first speech, vowing not to divide but to unify the country. Let's give each other a chance, he said at an event in Delaware, addressing those who didn't vote for him. Biden defeated incumbent President Donald Trump following a cliffhanger vote count after Tuesday's election. Trump has yet to concede and has not spoken publicly since his defeat was announced while he was playing golf. The result makes Trump the first one-term president since the 90s. His campaign has filed a barrage of lawsuits in various states, but election officials say there is no evidence that the vote was rigged against him, as he has said. Addressing cheering supporters in a car park in his hometown of Wilmington, Biden said, "I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide but to unify, who doesn't see the red and blue states, only sees the United States." Biden, who has won more than 74 million votes so far, the most ever for a US presidential candidate, hailed the diverse support he gathered during the campaign and thanked African American voters in particular. But he also reached out to Trump supporters directly. "It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again," he said. His running mate, Kamala Harris, in her first speech as vice president-elect, said, "While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last." She made history in more ways than one, being the first female and first woman of African American and South Asian American descent to get the job. Earlier, in a video posted to her social media, she was seen saying, we did it, Joe, you're going to be the next president of the United States." The French Prime Minister, Emmanuel Macron, has warned the second wave of coronavirus has brutally and violently arrived in the country after almost 90,000 cases were recorded in a single day. The figure of 86,852 COVID-19 cases reported by the country's health ministry for Saturday is a record high for the third day in a row, authorities said, although they added that there had been accidental underreporting earlier in the week. Total coronavirus cases in France have reached 1,748,705, the fifth highest tally globally, and linked deaths have also exceeded 40,000. Some 27,660 people are being treated in hospital. Back here in England, and hospitals in Greater Manchester are treating more COVID patients than at the peak of the first wave, resulting in non-urgent care being suspended. Non-urgent hospital surgery and appointments will not go ahead as planned, as coronavirus admissions have increased by 64 patients in just a week. Urgent and emergency care, such as cancer treatment, will continue. Before a nationwide lockdown came into force in England on Thursday, Greater Manchester had been in the highest level of the three-tier system of restrictions. The government is to spend more than £400 million to support poor children and their families in England, following a campaign by footballer Marcus Rashford. A winter grant scheme to be run by councils will provide support with food and bills, and a holiday food and activities programme is to be expanded. Rashford said it would improve the lives of almost 1.7 million children. The move represents a climb down for the government, which has said universal credit was the best way to help. The Queen has led Britain in marking Remembrance Sunday, as people around the UK privately paid their respects at home due to the coronavirus pandemic. She was joined by family members and the Prime Minister at the scaled-back service at the Cenotaph in London's Whitehall. Social distancing measures were in place and the service was closed off to the public for the first time. Normally, Whitehall is packed with thousands of veterans and members of the military for commemorations, but on Sunday, less than 30 veterans were in attendance. Millions have voted in Myanmar's general election, just the second since the military rule ended in 2011. It comes just 5 years after Aung San Suu Kyi won a landslide victory and entered into a power-sharing agreement with generals who still hold huge power in the country. Suu Kyi remains popular in Myanmar and is expected to win, but the Nobel Peace Prize winner and global icon has dramatically fallen from grace internationally for her response to the Rohingya crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim Rohingyas fled an army crackdown in 2017. Observers have questioned the credibility of the election because of the disenfranchisement of virtually all Rohingya. Azerbaijan has captured a key town in the separatist Nagorno-Karabakh region, according to the country's president. Ilham Aliyev announced in a televised address on Sunday that Azerbaijani forces had taken Shusha, known as Sushi in Armenian. Armenia, however, denied the town's capture and said fighting was ongoing. Capturing the strategically important town would be a major victory for Azerbaijan in the ongoing conflict over the disputed territory. Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognised as part of Azerbaijan, but is governed by ethnic Armenians backed by the Armenian government. Up to 150 people are feared to have been killed in a landslide in Guatemala after Storm Eta lashed Central America with torrential downpours. Many of those who lost their lives in the remote mountain village of Cueja in the country's central region of Alta Verapaz were buried in their homes under mud, according to authorities. The devastating weather front has wreaked havoc from Panama to Honduras and Mexico, which between them have recorded more than 50 flood-related deaths. And finally, Donald Trump's attempt to remain at the White House turned into farce, as his legal team ended up having to hold a press conference outside a landscape gardening firm and next to an adult bookstore and a crematorium. Instead of the Four Seasons Hotel in Philadelphia, it ended up happening at Four Seasons Total Landscaping on the outskirts of the city. Trump had put out in a now-deleted tweet that there would be a big press conference at the Four Seasons in Philadelphia. However, as the still incumbent president played golf and continued to say the election was stolen from him, the upmarket Four Seasons Hotel had to make clear that it was not involved in the Rudy Giuliani press conference. The event eventually went ahead in the car park of the garden centre. The unusual location and confusion has been meat and drink on social media, with thousands, including comedians, lapping up the situation, weighing in with jokes and memes. Some compared the bizarre occasion to something from a political satire programme, such as the BBC's The Thick of It or the US comedy Veep. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, here's breaking news, at least breaking to me. An old friend of mine, your vegan coach on Twitter, says, George, for your information, Jean-Luc Mélenchon has just announced his candidacy for the French presidential election in 2022. Now, that is big news. That is a candidate worth getting behind. I'll catch the train, the tunnel, whatever you call it. I'll be there, Jean-Luc. I'll be there on the streets of France campaigning for you. Stuart says, here's a prediction for you. Trump will be president until January 20th, 2021. Then a presidential decree will create a new month. Trumpuary, following December, which in his honor will be 1,460 days long. Problem solved. Stuart adds, P.S. I am also available for Middle East negotiations. Very, very funny, Stuart. Tweet of the night. Now, my second poll, has there been a coup in America? A, yes. B, no. C, depends what you mean. Well, that's very Clintonian. So you can vote on my Twitter feed. Has there been a coup in America? Yes, no, or I suppose maybe. Now, Moats Medic is up next in the midst of all this high politics. The coronavirus continues to cut a swathe. And as we heard earlier, I think from Chris, the numbers in the United States are mounting very alarmingly indeed. Let's check up with Dr. Ranjit as to what the situation is here in Britain. Dr. Ranjit Brar, welcome as always on the mother of all talk shows. Maybe a comment from you first, Doctor, on the situation in the US. I mean, it was only yesterday that it was 200,000. Now it's apparently, according to Chris Hedges, effectively 300,000. And he's predicting 400,000 dead people, which must mean a level of infection in the United States truly staggering. What can you tell us about the progress, if I can use that word, of the coronavirus elsewhere in the world before we turn to Britain?
George, good to be with you. Good to have you back. I'm glad to see you looking so well. Been enjoying the show. It's been fantastic. And as you say, lots going on in the world. Everyone's very preoccupied, understandably, with the US elections. So much so they almost didn't notice that we've had a new round of quantitative easing here as well. Again, intimately related to the coronavirus crisis.
Yeah, 150 billion, yeah?
Absolutely.
That is serious money. Did you ever think that a Tory government would be showering that amount of public money?
It's a staggering amount. We've not seen anyone previously give more. They've actually now given out more in quantitative easing, which is basically money given to banks or from the bank to the government and on to big businesses since, of course, Gordon Brown and the 2009 crash when the banks were bailed out when they were failing. But it's a larger amount even now than he's given out. But coming back, to the coronavirus numbers, you're right. This week in the world, there have been 4 million test-proven cases. Of course, the world has ramped up its testing capacity, but not that much in 1 week. And it's showing that the virus continues to, as you say, cut its way through the global population. Now in the world, there's been 51 million cases. In the United States, there have been more than 10 million cases. In the world, 1.25 million deaths, which basically means that there's, just in terms of the test-proven cases, still a 3% mortality of all of those test-proven cases. And the United States still accounts for 1/4 of those deaths. But you're right that the number of cases per day globally is skyrocketing. And on Thursday, we had a new record high, which was 617,000 cases in a single day worldwide. And the United States, again, accounted for a full quarter of those, really, at 132,797 cases in a single day, and basically pretty much all their states across the board showing an increase in cases. So, massive increase in cases. And as we know, there's a lag between the number of cases and that having a reflection in hospitalizations, ITU cases and deaths. But the two are very much coupled, and that's not changed, George.
And when you say coupled, is the turnover still around 2 weeks? So people get it and around 2 weeks later, they're in the hospital and some of them die?
In terms of the increase, yes, 2 weeks is basically the incubation period of the case. So those people out of the numbers who are getting it now, who will be adversely affected, and still we think 5 to 10% of people are likely to be hospitalized, less than 5% probably ventilated, and but somewhere 1 or 2% of them succumbing to the virus, George.
It's extremely disturbing. There's obviously no stopping it now. It's everywhere. If we'd acted as China and others did right at the beginning, then it could have been stopped. But there's no stopping it now. And so there seems to me only two options. Either a large number of people are going to succumb, and those that don't succumb will fill the hospitals, meaning that other people can't get in for other things, or we find a vaccine.
And I think some combination of those two things are happening, George. I mean, there's been good news on the vaccine front, and perhaps we can return to that in a little bit. But just looking at Britain's numbers, we're still seeing 20 to 25,000 cases a day, test proven. That's actually similar to last week. And it's the only optimistic sign in all of this, possibly driven by waves of behavioral change over the last week or two, possibly because of the Tier 3 lockdowns that were happening early in the northwest. But there has been not the kind of increase we were seeing previously that was doubling on doubling, but still a high number of cases. Hospitalizations are still increasing, and we're currently having about 1,500 people, 1,400, 1,500 people each day who are being hospitalized. It's very obvious to me that, again, the hospital is full of coronavirus, full of cases of people who have coronavirus, people who are ventilated and intubated on the intensive care unit. That's in the south, in the Midlands, in Yorkshire, northeast and northwest. So very much affecting our service delivery. Again, it's slowing down a rate of elective surgery. It's affecting the entire throughput through the NHS, and so why the NHS hasn't ground to the halt to the point that people who are presenting are not being admitted at all. It is absolutely affecting our normal pattern of care, and in that sense, again, the NHS is becoming overwhelmed, George.
As you know, and kindly referred, last week at this time, I was in a hospital. And I'll be candid with you, the only thing that was in my mind was the coronavirus. I was thinking to myself, I'm more likely to catch the coronavirus right here than anywhere else that I could possibly be. And yet people like you and your gallant colleagues are going in every day. Do you spend your whole day thinking about that?
Of course, it affects the way we work, and there's different levels of PPE. I've been mindful since the very beginning of this, George, that, as you say, we haven't done the things that China did. China published a quite beautiful document that I shared in February. So now, 8 months ago, which talked about, for example, the way in which hospitals had to be organized to stop the transmission from a single infectious patient to the rest of the vulnerable patients. They organized entirely separate hospitals, not just for ITU beds who are overflowing. They organized what they called a fever clinic, so a hospital which was organized specifically to, rapidly triage, admit, stratify in terms of risk, take care for, get well as many as possible, and discharge patients with coronavirus. And they had social isolation. So rather than just having testing, we heard from Independent Sage and from various sources this week that the staggeringly low figure of between 5 and 10% of people who are currently getting positive tests and being asked to isolate are actually isolating.
Wow.
So that's essentially... It doesn't matter whether you have lockdown or not, doesn't matter what other policies you put into effect. That's neutralizing the entire mechanism that we currently have that we know is effective against coronavirus. And it's an absolute failure. And yet Dido Harding still sits there presiding over this farce. That money should be being transferred to the NHS. Instead, the NHS is being systematically starved of resources, continues to decline in capacity. And in fact, the Sunday Times... of all people who obviously politically very closely aligned to the Boris Johnson government. I wonder if they're having a crisis of faith in him, because they've done quite a nice expose, in fact, on the vaccine task force, and Kate Bingham herself, married to another MP, just as Dido Harding is, that in this instance, Jessie Norman, again connected via school and university, Oxford University, of course, to the Prime Minister himself, appointed. She herself was a management in essentially a venture capitalist firm to do with health. She's been appointed to oversee the spending, the acquisition of vaccines, and spending hundreds of billions of UK taxpayer money without any medical qualification. And she's actually been outed by the Times as not only doing that, but abusing her role. She continues to work as a venture capitalist in the health industry. And, tickets are being sold by an American health group, health technology group, $2,500 a head to come and listen to her speak, because at her last conference she recently gave, she actually gave information that out of the 55 vaccines that are currently reaching a production level, she indicated which ones the UK government, which 14 the UK government were going to be investing in. And of course that will affect investment decisions and strategy, and it's a complete abuse of her
insider trading.
It's insider trading, but it just shows you that you've got someone who's not medical. The NHS is not leading the acquisition of vaccines any more than it's leading track and trace. We're all victims of it. And so, I in the first wave, George, I'm pretty sure that I had the virus. At that stage, there wasn't testing available. There wasn't testing for me or my family. I think my family probably had it as well. There wasn't testing for them. At that stage, there wasn't antibody test available. There was a trial being run in my hospital, but I was busy in surgery, so I was unable to get the vaccine. So I still don't know whether I've had it. I assume I have. So, personally, I probably feel safe just in terms of demographic, probably in terms of having it. But you're right, my colleagues don't know. In the first wave, 600 health professionals died from this with inadequate PPE. And I think you have to do one thing or the other. Either you have the kind of response that China had, where you fully protect your staff, you fully redesign your health services to cope with the health demands that are being placed on them at that time. At one time, that was just cardiovascular disease. Now it's this epidemic as well, and we need to factor that in. Croydon Hospital have done a little project where they've managed to ring fence a part of their hospital as being a green zone where COVID won't go so that they can do some elective surgery. And this is being hailed as a great revolution. It's kind of common sense, and it's what China did on a national scale in February. And of course, we absolutely have failed to do so because our government is still dedicated not to protecting the NHS, as they say, but funneling huge amounts of money from the state coffers into private hands, into companies and individuals who are closely allied with them, because that fundamentally is their raison d'etre, it's their ideological outlook. And I fear that it means that we are failing to score the very easy goals, to pick the low-hanging fruit of really just simply, now we have the testing capacity, using it to actually make sure that the people who have the virus isolate from society. And it's precisely for this reason, that we are being punished as a whole society, and again going through this second phase of lockdown, but it's a half a lockdown or a quarter lockdown. It's really punctuated herd immunity. It may suppress the numbers, but there's no intention really of eradicating the virus. It's not impossible to do so, but I think it's impossible for our government under these societal conditions, guided as they are with their current priorities. I think they have utterly failed. But what mystifies me perhaps even more is the fact that our opposition are so hell-bent, the Labour Party are so hell-bent on expelling Corbyn or suspending Corbyn and proving themselves to be no different than the Tory party, rather than doing anything to hold our government.
Yeah, talk about low-hanging fruit. If I was the leader of the opposition in this calamitous, catastrophic situation you've just described, everyone would know about it. Give us some good news, Doctor, on the vaccine. Anything you can tell us?
I think there are a few things. China is developing 4 of the world's 9 leading vaccines. I think CanSino this week signed a big deal with Mexico, in addition to Pakistan and Russia. So they are completing their phase 3 trial in Mexico and have started vaccinating a large group as part of that trial there. Again, one of the other companies, Sinovac in China, have now announced that they have inoculated 100,000 people in China, 100,000 Chinese volunteers and frontline staff with their vaccine, which is an adenovirus, a killed vaccine. So they've manufactured the vaccine, heat it to denature it, and then give that protein. And they've had not a single adverse reaction. And more than that, 56,000 of those have traveled outside China to coronavirus hotspots, and not one of them has been affected. So there's every sign that China will very shortly be able to deliver vaccines on a scale which will make a fundamental difference to the world. AstraZeneca, our company, our vaccine czar, our vaccine task force, Kate Bingham, hasn't invested at all in any of the Chinese vaccines or the Russian vaccines, which I think are still the front runners. Nevertheless, I think it's likely AstraZeneca will start to go in production, but she's only managed to secure 1 or 2 million doses as opposed to and those for the beginning of next year, perhaps if they pass their phase 3 trial, rather than the 30 million that were promised by September. So I think on the world scale, I think the vaccine technology will come about. It'll make a huge difference in our ability to stop the spread of the pandemic, because the virus is so infectious that there is a high chance that left totally unchecked, 80% of the population of the world would get it. So the vaccine will have an important part to play. I think that's the very good news, that we are getting near to the point where on a world scale we're getting those vaccines. I think, again, our politicians, through their ideological links, through their global political ambition, through their desire to suppress and fight China and Russia, will cut themselves off quite likely from access to those. Though I think, it's something that they can be pressured on. If our vaccine does not come forward in good time, we should be demanding the effective vaccines that are available.
Well, don't expect the leader of the Labour Party to make that demand. Doctor, as always, a great pleasure and a tremendous advantage to our viewers and listeners to be able to get these regular updates. Much obliged to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, Claire says neither of them will be declared president in January. There's too much evidence to prove that a coup is in place. Thousands of votes not counted or destroyed for Trump. Since when do the media choose the president? The next 8 weeks will change history, says Claire. But Margaret says, going out on a limb here, I would love to see Harris as President of the United States. Now, my poll is now running. Has there been a coup in America? Yes, 60%. No, 28%. Or C, depends what you mean, 12%. Already 1,000 votes. You've still got half an hour to get your votes in on that. Now, let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
Time, weather, and...
Let's play a game and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, we're talking about the American presidential election, by and large. Has there been a coup in America? More than half of you, 60% of you, think so. It's all over to you now. It's call time. Here's Ray in Brighton. Go ahead, Ray.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good, thanks. Go ahead.
It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And before I make my point, I just wanted to say that I love the way, always, that you handle the mainly biased media when they have you in for an interview.
Yeah, although they never do now. That's probably why they never do now.
Yeah, but when you appeared before the American Senate, George, for my money, that was a masterclass in how to administer a verbal kicking.
Thank you.
But
it made me famous in America, at least.
But to make my point, George, I'm sure that yourself, like me and thousands of other people in this country, are absolutely disgusted at the incident today that appeared near the Cenotaph in London, where the piper, who was there purely to show his respects to fallen comrades, was shoved to the floor by one of the Metropolitan Police officers. And I wondered what your take was on that.
I did see that. I did see that video. It seemed to me a thoroughly unnecessary push. The man did wheel, if you like, as if to march into the police line. But there are ways of stopping someone walking through you that don't involve throwing them violently to the ground with bagpipes in their hands. The bigger picture is the way that the Remembrance Day was effectively banned throughout the country, except for Tony Blair. I saw Tony Blair there at the Cenotaph, his face waxed with grief over the loss of people in war. But the ordinary Joe and the widows of servicemen and so on were not able to pay their respects properly. And I think that was very badly handled. However, on this particular case of the piper, he's now been charged because he allegedly got up from the fall and then assaulted a police officer. He's now charged, so we can't go too far into that, Ray, because it's now sub judice. But my general dissatisfaction with how the Remembrance Day was handled, I think agrees with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's the hypocrisy of all, George, that really gets my goat, is where you had people like Theresa May and Boris Johnson and Sadiq Khan. And for my money, these people...
Hypocrites all.
Yeah, hypocrites, yeah. To actually stand with their heads bowed in front of the Cenotaph, and all of them complicit, for my money, in trying to remove the freedoms that millions and millions of men and women from England, Wales, Scotland and all over gave their lives in the construct that they were giving their lives to save our way of life and our freedoms.
Hypocrites all. I agree with you, Ray.
Yeah,
Many thanks for that, my friend. The hour means I need to move on. Paul is in London. Go ahead, Paul.
Cheers, sir. That hypocrite point is actually part of what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
Because you know all this Trump stuff to do with the votes and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I saw that Lib Dem geezer pop up.
And the Scottish nationalist. And the SNP.
Precisely. And this one sort of affects, because you're like quite involved in a sort of stop the second referendum thingy.
Yeah.
Did these people who were marching up and down for a second referendum all this time, for the last 3 years, did they not ever think that this could one day be used upon them? In the SNP case, they've got a sort of reason because they could now get a second vote in Scotland.
Yeah.
But you've seen the state of the polls in Scotland. I don't care either which way. I've got to be honest with you. But for someone who's like some of these people who were marching for a second referendum on that issue, probably didn't ever think
the hypocrisy is mind-boggling. These are people demanding that the vote for Joe Biden be respected when they spent 4 years trying to destroy the outcome of the Brexit referendum. We're ready to do anything, including forcing everyone to vote again. Imagine if Trump's demand was for a people's vote on whether or not he should continue, and everyone will have to run the election again just to make sure that the outcome is correct. I mean, the hypocrisy of these people has no end. Last word, Paul.
That's precisely the view, and I'm saying it could end up with that, because obviously all that stuff's going to go in Scotland. You've got the only people who can argue that you shouldn't have to vote again on it will be the Tories, but the other lot are naked.
Exactly.
They can't say it.
And if there ever was a Scottish independence referendum, there would have to be a withdrawal agreement. There would have to be a confirmatory vote, a people's vote. Talk about hoisting yourself on your own petard. Paul, thanks for that call. Here's Hashim in, I'm not sure where he is. Go ahead, Hashim.
Good evening, George. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you, sir?
I'm from Ypres, Belgium.
Ah, okay. Very nice to talk to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. First of all, George, I would like to tell you that I love you very much and I respect you very much for your stances.
Thank you.
Second of all, I would like to know your opinion about what's next for the Middle East, especially for Lebanon and the resistance in the area.
Well, the change of government in January potentially means some changes that might be good and some changes that might be bad. I think that Biden's pledge to end American involvement in the war in Yemen will be difficult to get out of. His relations with Saudi Arabia are not the same as the relations that they had with Donald Trump. So you might get some change in the Gulf. But in the Levant, it seems to me quite likely that once the Obama, Clinton, Biden gang are back in power together, that the outcome for the people in Lebanon and Syria will not be good and could be much worse. Rania Khalek said earlier she didn't think that they would start the war again in Syria. I'm not myself so sure about that. And of course, what happens in Syria has an immediate effect in Lebanon. Hashim, your view?
Yes, I think you're right, and we all know that the region for this moment is in a very difficult situation. Not only the Levant, but also with Iran, of course.
Yeah.
So yes, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. La shukra ala wajib. Rashid is in California. Go ahead, Rashid.
George, how are you? I just want to say that the results of your poll regarding the coup, it's 60% now in favor of the coup. The results will change after the show is over.
Oh, yeah?
Just to be consistent with what's happened in the United States.
Very good. I was slow there. You got me, Rashid. You got me. Yeah, they'll be rigged. They'll be rigged overnight. Once the people counting have to go for a sleep for 2 hours. Yeah, go ahead, Rashid.
I want to say to you, the deep state has showed how it can flex its muscles on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, quite impressive, isn't it? It's quite an impressive
Yes, both in the United Kingdom and the United States, we've been shown that they will not tolerate outsiders to have access to power or even attempt to have access to power. As you know, as soon as Jeremy Corbyn initiated his attempt to become leader of the Labour Party, they started attacking him.
Yeah.
And then once he was leader, he tried to resolve it instead of aggressively going after him, as you told him personally. And then he sacrificed people like Ken Livingstone and other stalwarts of the Labour Party just to appease that monster. What he didn't understand was it was never Corbyn. It's the idea of Corbyn that anybody who has an independent, thoughtful perspective on the needs of the people will not be allowed to be in power. We have an oligarchy that runs our nations, and anybody who deviates from that will be crushed. And similarly, the media is on board with that oligarchy across the board.
Yeah,
in the United States.
But the law of diminishing returns eventually kicks in, Rashid. The more people can see that, the more they have to make a choice between submitting to what is essentially slavery at the hands of the power, or a greater determination to break that power. I choose the latter. Some will choose the former. But when they are forced, as they have been with Corbyn, and now, I know it sounds ridiculous to link the two, but and now with Trump, when they are forced so openly to show their hands, that shows that they are powerful, but it also might be the beginning of the decline of that power, because the more people know that the democracy they live in is a sham, and that you're allowed to choose only between Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and if you demand someone quite different, then trouble will ensue. The more they're forced to do that, Rashid, then the closer to the end will their power be. Last word to you.
Sir, the next step in that equation is, are the individual people looking in the mirror ready to take on that challenge? You said yourself forcefully, you're in that game, but it takes a different level of stones for individuals to say, I'm ready to sacrifice because I'm concerned about my great-grandchildren, not just myself and my children. That's the balance we're up against. I just want to know, is everybody who recognizes what you just said, are they up to the challenge? Are they ready to take on that challenge?
That's a powerful call, Richard. We should end it before both of us get arrested. Richard is in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Hello, George. Thank you very much for taking my call. I'm pleased that you're doing well and your family are good.
Thank you. Well. Very kind of you. Thanks.
I've got a few observations I'd like your opinions on.
Go ahead.
The trade deal, our trade deal, was more or less a certainty with Trump and Johnson and their relationship. And, of course, Obama came across when he was trying to stop our democratic vote, the referendum and Brexit.
When he was trying to interfere in our elections.
He was, and he said, you will go to the back of the queue. Mm-hmm. And Donald was going to give us a trade deal. Is that right?
I don't know how close they were to getting one. We don't have one at the minute, and our trade with America is doing quite well, actually. But you're right to flag up. There are very significant implications for Britain and for Brexit in a Biden presidency. Big potential. We might have no trade deal. We might have Biden positively interfering in our internal affairs vis-a-vis the Irish question and vis-a-vis Brussels. There's a real possibility of that.
I think so. And, of course, Pelosi came out
spitting the false teeth out or whatever to say, we will never do a deal with Great Britain, never do a deal with the United Kingdom. That suited her because I think she was having a bad off day with Trump. The other thing that I've seen this week is this leader of the Kosovan leader, Thaci,
the Kosovan Liberation Army, so-called, yeah.
He's going to stand now on his own volition for war crimes.
He's now on a charge of 100 murders at the International Criminal Court.
Do you think that Tony Blair can now be made to stand for war crimes, that he has committed all of his...
only if a state prosecutes him, and that's not likely to happen. But Tony Blair turned our Air Force into the Air Force of the so-called Kosovan Liberation Army. And their leader is now on trial for mass murder. Makes you think, Richard. Anyway, I need to press on, my dear friend, because of the hour. Wafam is in London on Kamala Harris. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Galloway.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to say it's a pleasure to talk to you. I've been a huge fan of yours for a while.
Thank you.
And my question was, after Joe Biden got elected, there was resurgence of a lot of videos from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's views on Israel, their speeches. And I just wanted to ask you, what are your views on that, and how is that going to affect the deal of the century and the Levant region in general, and I would say also, pro-Western Arab countries such as Jordan, Egypt, how would their role be affected in the deal with the new administration?
I mean, both administrations, Trump and Biden, and Obama, even though Obama knew more about the Middle East than any American president ever. I myself talked to him about that. He told me that he had sat at the feet of the late and great Professor Edward Said. He knows and knew everything about the reality of Middle Eastern politics, but it didn't make any difference at all when he was in power. So I think the American policy in the Middle East is permanent. Whoever is the president, whichever of Tweedledee or Tweedledum is in power. So as I said earlier, I think there will be some areas where there will be change for the better. On the Iran front, I believe that the US will rejoin some form of the Iran nuclear deal, and therefore the danger of war with Iran will recede. I think that the US will not continue supporting the Saudi war against Yemen, but I do think that Syria and therefore Lebanon are both in danger from the reunion of the gang that couldn't shoot straight of Obama, Clinton, and Biden. Here's another call, a new one from Chicago. It's Ali Reza. Ali Reza, welcome. We've lost him. Okay, Emma says, once Harris is president, then Hillary will take from her as vice. Then Harris will have an unfortunate accident and Hillary then becomes the president. What a low opinion, Emma, you've got of Mrs. Clinton. And Gary says, this is a good one, are the laws regarding dementia in the USA much different from the UK, i.e. being able to legally sign documents, etc.? Asking for a friend. Ali Reza's back. Ali Reza, welcome. Go ahead.
Hello, George. It's very nice speaking to you.
Thank you.
And it's always nice to hear you on your show and your other shows on RT.
Thank you.
Speaking to you as an Iranian, I just wanted to tell you that, yes, it seems that the U.S. foreign policy towards Iran and the Middle East always remains. And it doesn't matter whether it's Biden, the left hand of the establishment, but given some changes that took place in the past few months, one of them being lifting the arms embargo on Iran, and Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif visiting Venezuela and Bolivia, and there are talks about there could be talks, about selling arms, possibly even missiles, ballistic missiles. I was wondering, what do you think? Is that going to, because this is not something that, it just happened recently, and it could definitely bring about...
The arms embargo placed on Iran ran out. The U.S. tried to extend it and failed. So Iran is free to sell weapons to any other state in the same way that Britain or the United States are. But I suspect that this will be one of the cards played by the new U.S. administration on whether or not they come back into the Iran nuclear deal or not. What's your feeling about U.S. re-engagement in the nuclear deal?
Okay, I tell you something, that I know Iran is not going to back down, and accepting new terms on the deal, and I'm sure of that. Like, I have no doubt. They want to. They say that if United States wants to gain a seat, it needs to regain the seat that it previously left, and so they're not going to give leverage on their missiles, on their defense capabilities to the United States at all. I know that, and but at the same time, Biden is getting all the advantages that the Trump has imposed on Iran, all the maximum pressure campaigns. So Biden is getting all of that, and it's something that he has negotiating power, with, and that's why it's a little unclear exactly what's going to happen. But I know that it's not going to be like before. Like everything is going to be peaceful. The U.S. will abide, by its, by its end of the bargain. It's hard to say, but I know that Iranians will not back down, and they will not going to accept new terms on the already negotiated deal.
Okay, let's see how it develops. Stay in touch, Ali Reza. We'll await developments. Andrew is in Shropshire in England. Andrew, go ahead.
Hello, George. Nice to speak to you.
And you, sir. Go ahead, sir.
You, sir, too. I was just wanted to gauge your opinion on the Build Back Better message that we saw Boris Johnson trot out a few weeks ago. Basically, we've seen Biden give the same message, and I speak a few languages, so I read different newspapers in different languages, and I've seen, the Spanish Prime Minister do the same thing, Macron's looking at it, and Germany are looking at it. So Build Back Better with a green economy, transfer of skills, let's learn different things. Is this a UK thing, or is this a global thing? What do you think?
I don't know. I don't even know what Build Back Better actually means. These public relations slogans are vacuous, empty, meaningless to me. What do you think?
I completely agree with you. It's totally vacuous, meaningless nonsense, but it seems to be that governments across the country are rolling the same thing out, and I don't know where to stand with it.
Maybe the same company got the contract across other countries. So the reality is we're not building back. Still less are we building back better. We are trying to shore up collapsing infrastructure and a collapsing economy. The government's new QE of £150 billion on top of the uncountable, by me, numbers that have already been rolled out as quantitative easing, proving that there always was a magic money tree, proving that it was always a lie, that we had to suffer 10 whole years of bitter austerity, more than 10 years. There always was an answer when we needed something that could be justified as expenditure, as investment. It's all tumbling down now, and scales are falling from people's eyes. At least I hope so, Andrew. Andy is in Cornwall. Go ahead, Andy.
Hi, George. Sorry, I missed that. I do apologise. I missed that last bit. What's the discussion? Because there's a few things I want to get off my chest.
Go ahead, whatever you want to talk about. No, we were talking about Build Back Better as a slogan.
Oh, it's ridiculous, isn't it? You know, it's are the necromancers? Are they going to build it up from? You know, they're going to build a corpse. Is what they're going to do. And that's not just this government. I mean, it doesn't matter what you vote for. You're still going to get a government at the end of the day, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
And it's absurd. It's absurd, George. You know, it seems like the following an agenda, the government, our government, and irrespective of the evidence, there's no fact-based evidence that they're following because it's running contrary to what's actually happening. I mean, if you didn't see the news, if you didn't watch the news at all, you wouldn't know anything what's going on, re COVID-19. And it's just absurd, George. I mean, there's people genuinely suffering financially. You know, all this suicide must be through the roof, businesses closing. I mean, there's police going to gyms, for heaven's sake, and soft play areas. For what? I think it's absurd, and there's somebody else pulling the strings, in my opinion.
Who's the somebody?
Well, go to Davos, you know, the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum. I mean, they openly state that they want a Great Reset, they want to reset everything to do with society as it is, and that's for the common man, for the working man. It's not for them, you know, for thee, but not for me.
Okay, the hour precludes a long debate on that. I'm sorry to say, but you know my view on it, and if you don't, you can go to YouTube, where I've addressed it many other times. Les is in Jersey. Let's hear from him. Les, go ahead.
Good evening, George. Congratulations on believing another kid, and it looks like you've got a smashing family. You've got a smashing family there.
Thanks, Les.
I was just going to talk briefly about the electoral system in America. Don't you think, compared to ours, it's just absurd? And with Trump putting his appeal in, I hope he gets. I don't think he's going to get any joy with keeping himself in power. But if he can change the way things are done, I mean, you know, all these accusations are possible, you know, misdoings. I mean, they can read a number plate from a satellite on a car. Why don't they just put cameras up in these counts? And then if they know they're on camera, so that just eradicates that straight away. And all the votes must be counted on the night. And when you look at our polling places, the people are running with the ballot boxes, running with them. And the counts, everybody's busy.
They stopped counting in the middle of the night in America. They literally
incredible.
stopped in the middle of the night.
I mean, that's got to change. I've never seen such a lethargic count.
Well, you know, the idea that the United States is the arbiter of democratic elections has certainly taken a heavy knock. Les, thanks for that. Now, we're off to the States. A whistle-stop tour of the Carolinas. First to South Carolina. Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George. Great to talk to you again. Never miss a show.
Good, sir.
Hey, let me say this about that. Here in the United States, over 1/2 of the population of the country are sighing a huge sigh of relief that the idiot in chief is gone. Okay? The other half of the country is having a giant panic attack. I mean, they are really, really afraid of what's going to happen in the next little while here. But
what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think there's going to be a transition of power is going to happen on January 20th, and like Biden said, there are plenty of people in the government who are willing to frog march any people in the White House that don't belong there after January the 20th, and I think that certainly will happen. But,
you don't think the courts You don't think the courts will intervene?
I don't see where he has any standing on any case that would affect the 5 states that are going to be, you know,
too many states, really, yeah.
Right, and too many, you know, legal hurdles for him to try and get over. I just don't see any way that can happen. I mean, right now the vote count's going to be 300 and something to 200 and something, which is way too much for him to overcome.
And do you think there's been a coup in America?
Well, it depends on how you describe a coup. You know, what actually constitutes a coup. I mean, in fact, everybody is so almost evenly split. Like here in South Carolina, okay, Trump won overwhelmingly here, okay, but I actually voted for, I cast my vote a write-in for Chris Hedges. And because I knew that my vote wouldn't make any difference. I mean, if I was in a battleground state, I would have voted for Biden just to end the Trump nightmare, okay? But I wasn't, and I knew that my vote wouldn't make any difference here. But
well, you voted for a very fine man, Chris Hedges. I hope he's watching still.
Yes.
Mike, I need to press on because I've got to go to North Carolina and talk to Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, how you doing, George?
I'm
hey,
good.
George,
I'm good. What's the outcome? We're not going to know your outcome until next week. Why?
Right. Well, there's a lot of crookedness going on. So I was saying, look, George, I'm not a great Trump fan by any means. I did vote for him because if Stalin ran against Biden, I would have voted for Stalin. Okay. All right. That's how
so would I think.
Biden. Yeah, I would have voted for El Chapo over Biden. Okay. That's what I think of Biden. But the thing is this. It is so obvious that this election is a fraud. I mean, this is what I believe is going to happen, George. I believe the Supreme Court is going to get involved. There's tons of evidence about the fraud. A lot of these states are going to have to not only recount, but be audited. By the time of January 20th, nothing's going to be decided properly. And what they say is at that point, Nancy Pelosi, who's nothing looking like a horrible-looking scarecrow, a frightening-looking scarecrow who's put together with plastic surgery, it looks like, okay, and the woman's got basically no thinking process. They're going to stick her in there temporarily while this is all figured out. We're going to be the laughingstock of the world, George. We have no business going to other countries and telling them how to run their elections or how to do their business. And you know what? We're getting it right back now. I hate to see this. I love this country, but for crying out loud, George, this is an outrage. This election is so, if they're going to steal something, at least make it look good. They didn't make it look good. They actually went and, they cooked the books. They had this mail-in ballots, which is all garbage. I'm not afraid of COVID, okay? I went to vote. Me and you are about the same age group. So I take care of myself, okay? I eat right, plenty of nutrition. I exercise, and that's what people should do instead of, masks aren't going to protect you, and neither is staying away from the ballot going to protect you. You should have voted. If you want to vote, you should have voted in person. Millions of Americans, Brits, and Russians have died to keep our countries from being gobbled up by the worst type of monster like Hitler, and yet people are afraid to go to the ballot to a voting booth. Are you kidding me?
Great call, Mark. I've got to end it though because there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol, and she's the last caller. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I'm glad you're a bit better, but
I'm much better.
You'll have to take care of that little cough.
Yeah, actually, it's caused by shouting.
Yeah, well, this is reasons to be cheerful because it's such a topsy-turvy world.
Yeah.
First of all, there's a lovely little photo of Oban I saw on Twitter.
My latest, yes, my little daughter. What a lovely girl.
Yeah, and the other point was, Mr. Trump, obviously.
Yeah.
Although I disliked him, this is frivolous. He entertained me because he was quite a funny showman, and I always had the desire to hear his crazy comments, That does sound frivolous, but he did, not because of his awful politics.
He was a circus act, actually, Norma.
He was. Yeah. And the other little thing at the end is you've had 3 calls from Bristol tonight, I'm number 3.
We must have a big audience in Bristol, and why shouldn't we?
That's right. Mr. Bra did say, Ranjit Bra, that hopefully we may have a vaccine, might be, the Chinese one next year.
Yeah.
Well, if we do, perhaps we can start breathing a bit more lightly again,
Yeah, I was heartened, Norma, by what he said about the vaccine, and it seems that China and Russia are ahead of the game, and I'm quite friendly with both China and Russia, so I'm bound to be able to get a vaccination somewhere. If only I could get out of the country in order to get it. Norma, my dear, lovely to hear you sounding so hale and hearty and cheerful. It's been a remarkable show, I think. Some of the interviews, particularly Chris Hedges, will live long and fly wide. And the story isn't over yet. In fact, it isn't over until the fat lady sings in the Supreme Court of the United States of America. It's been marvelous from me. Hope it was for you.